1 second. We're live.
I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of December 14th, 2020 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul McPherson, Counselor and Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. We're meeting electronically through Zoom during this declared emergency period. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast at our YouTube channel. We'll move into roll call. I will ask our town clerk to complete a roll call of council so that we can confirm quorum.
Thank you. Mayor Easton,
Present.
Councilor Rajima,
Present.
thank you. Councilor Russell,
Here.
Councilor Brunet,
Here.
Councilor Pachariva,
Happy to be here.
Councilor McPherson,
Here.
Councilor Miklick,
Here.
Councilor Timmers,
Here.
Councilor Reimer,
Here.
and we have quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. In addition, I want to take a moment to welcome the staff we have joining us tonight electronically. Chief Administrative Officer Mike Kirkopoulos, Finance Treasurer Terry Tuwala, Director of Planning and Development Kathleen Dale, our Associate Director of Planning and Development Matt Bruder, Director of Community Services Shannon McKay, our Associate Director of Recreation and Culture Sarah Ain, Fire Chief Greg Hudson, our Director of Economic Development and Communications Paul Deaney, our Director of Public Works Dave Graham, our Manager of Corporate Communications Liliana Busnello, our Cultural Development Coordinator Jasmine Proto, our Cultural Development Coordinator Jessica Wilson, our Legislative and Committee Coordinator Aaron Plant. We also have Josh Workington, our planner, joining us this evening. And moderating and clerking the meeting today, we have our town clerk, Julie Kirklos, and IT staff are also in attendance. As this is a virtual meeting, I will ask that we follow some procedures during this electronic meeting. Should there be a connection or service disruption for the chair, or if quorum is lost, the chair and or clerk will call a 10-minute recess to reconnect and to regain quorum. If quorum is lost, the meeting will be adjourned. If connection is lost from the chair, the clerk will ask those in attendance to wait up to 10 minutes to provide the chair time to reconnect and resume the meeting. Otherwise, after that time frame, the vice chair will resume the meeting until the chair has reconnected and resumes their role. Each member of council who wishes to speak, please press the raise hand feature on your video call and the clerk will track our speakers list tonight and then invite you to speak when I open up for comments or questions. Also, when I finish reading a motion announcing the mover, the clerk will then call out the vote by reading each member of council's name out loud. Please remember to take yourselves off mute during this portion of the meeting so that you can confirm if you support or oppose. Also, when not speaking, please remember to put yourselves on mute. Now move into declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? I understand that Councilor Reimer has a declared interest to agenda item 5.3 and 5.4 related to PD, report PD-34-20. Councilor Reimer?
Thank you, Chairman McPherson. Yes, declaring interest items 5.3 and 5.4. The applicant is my daughter and son-in-law.
Very good. Thank you, Councilor. The clerk will make note, and when we are at that item, you will be removed from participating at that time. Moving to confirmation of the agenda, do members have any amendments to the order of the agenda? See, none. We have two public hearings this evening. The purpose of the public meetings is to receive comments from the public and consider questions regarding item 5.1 report PD-33-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by Dennis and Karen Hodgins.
See, that's what I mean.
Item 5.3 report PD-34-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by Owen Barkway. Please be advised, Section 3412 of the Planning Act requires that before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must ensure that sufficient information and material is available to understand generally the proposal being considered, and council must hold at least one public hearing for the purpose of giving the public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendment. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the town of Lincoln before the applications are approved, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of town council to the local planning appeal tribunal. Personal information is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and may be contained in an appendix to a staff report published in the meeting agenda, delegation list, and/or the minutes of the public meeting and made part of the public record. The town of Lincoln collects this information to make informed decisions on the relevant issues and to notify interested parties of council's decisions. It may also be used to serve notice of an local planning appeal tribunal hearing. Names and addresses contained in submitted correspondence and other information will be available to the public unless the individual expressly requests the town to remove their personal information. The disclosure of this information is governed by the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, RSO 1990 CM 56. We stress that at this point, no decision has been made on the application, and council will take any comments received into account in their consideration of these items. Members of the public are reminded to give their name and address when they speak. If approved by council, a notice of the items passing will be circulated with an appeal period. Now move to report PD-33-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by Dennis and Karen Hodgins. Our first public hearing is for the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment application by Dennis and Karen Hodgins. We have one delegation registered this evening. With respect, pardon me for a minute. I've just lost my place, pardon me, in the script. We have one delegation registered this evening with respect to the public hearing. Please note that each delegation may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Everyone that registered has been provided a link to join the meeting as well as the phone number should they encounter technical difficulties. Should they lose connection, staff will try to make connection with those individuals. Our first delegation is listed as item 5.2, Karen and Dennis Hodgins, who will be speaking to item 5.1, report PD-33-20, zoning bylaw amendment application by Dennis and Karen Hodgins. Please begin when you are ready, and please remember you have 5 minutes.
Okay, you're up. My name is Karen Hodgins, and this is my husband, Dennis. We live at 5179 Spring Creek Road. My mother, Lois Hauser, we would like to move her into a garden suite on our property. And in order that we can take better care of each other. And I don't need any more time. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's
Thank
perfect.
you.
Okay, are there any questions to the delegate?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there no more speakers or other information for consideration for this item? I now declare the public hearing to address 5.1 report PD-33-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by Dennis and Karen Hodgins closed. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councilor Brunet that council receive zoning bylaw amendment application PLZA TU 20200118 in the name of Dennis and Karen Hodgins for information, and that a recommendation report be prepared once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. We'll now ask the clerk to call out the vote.
Thanks, Chair McPherson. Counselor Brunei,
Yes.
Counselor McPherson,
Yes.
Counselor Miklick,
Yes.
Counselor Pachiriva,
Yes.
Counselor Reimer,
Yes.
Counselor Rajima,
Yes.
Counselor Russell,
Yes.
Counselor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Support.
and that carries.
Move to item 5.3, report PD-34-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by Owen Barkway. Our second public hearing is for the purpose of zoning bylaw amendment application by Owen Barkway. As Councillor Reimer declared interest earlier in the meeting, Councillor Reimer will be removed electronically from this discussion and will return after this item has been addressed. We have, are we good there, Madam Clerk?
I'm just putting him in the virtual waiting room where he can't hear or participate in the discussion. Give me one moment. And we are good to go.
All right, we have one delegation registered this evening with respect to this public hearing. Please note that each delegation may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Each individual that registered has been provided a link to join the meeting as well as the phone number should they encounter technical difficulties. Lose connection, staff will try to make connection with those individuals. Our first delegation is listed as our first delegation in this report is Owen Barkway, who will be speaking to item 5.3 report PD-34-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by Owen Barkway. Please begin, Owen, when you are ready, and please remember you have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Owen, this is my wife, Brooke, and we are just proposing an application to put a trailer, like a mobile home, on my parents' property. We have a 50-acre farm and we're just slowly taking on a little more work, so we'd like to be closer to the farm, just so it's easier for us to delegate more time to be able to be here. And yeah, that's all I need.
We're good?
That's good, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Owen. Our speakers are nice and to the point and can move us along. So are there any questions to the delegation?
We do have a question raised, Chair McPherson, by Mayor Easton.
Very good. Go ahead, Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a problem with the application. I think it would be worthwhile separating out the use of a help house versus a temporary structure as the garden suite is. If we could have some explanation of that from Mr. Bruder, I guess.
Mr. Bruder?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So good question for sure. So the temporary garden suite, such as this application, is temporary in nature. The zoning for that is temporary, is for 20 years. They enter into a temporary use agreement with us, whereas a farm help house, a little bit different. They are permitted on an agricultural property for employees of said farm. Those are subject to a site plan process and are much more permanent in nature, and they are explicitly meant for farm help. So that's kind of the main difference between the two.
And so, Mr. Chairman, through you, this is the decision of choice then as we go forward. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I believe so. That's the way the applicant has wished to come forward, is with the temporary garden suite.
Okay, and we're supporting it, so therefore that's the decision of choice for the town, whereas in the past it was the help house was considered the only alternative.
Yeah, that's correct. At this point, we haven't written the staff recommendation report, but that is the manner in which we're moving forward as for a temporary garden suite and assessing the application based on the set of merits that are applicable to that.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, the third part of that would be, would this consideration also fit in with a temporary workers house, a migrant worker housing? Would this fall into that category as well?
Mr. Bruder?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Your worship, you mean in terms of whether or not it's a garden suite or a farm help house? Because farm help houses, yes, they can be used for migrant workers as well.
And so would this be an option as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I suppose it could be. I mean, the main intent is to house typically family members as required. Kind of what's being proposed here, sometimes in the manner of having aging parents on the site as well. But I mean, if one were so inclined, it's just, yeah, it'd be subject to that temporary restriction for the temporary land use period. That's all.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, my questions are really by way of demonstrating that there's considerable flexibility now that didn't exist even 5 years ago. Thank you very much.
Yes, there is. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Are there any other questions from council for the delegation?
Councillor Miklick is up.
Councillor Miklick, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This comment or these questions kind of pertain to both of these applications as they're similar this evening, the one prior that we voted on. Of interest is the one prior, there was a garage component to that application. And I'm just trying to get a better understanding of what temporary, what is temporary besides the spirit of it only being for 20 years. What would constitute a temporary dwelling or a temporary accessory dwelling or granny suite?
Mr. Bruder?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And good question for sure. When we talk about temporary, there's kind of two ways we've considered it in previous applications and moving forward. One being, of a mobile nature, one dwelling that can be taken off and on the site, a trailer, what have you, or a modular unit that can be easily disassembled. Another one would be, and we've seen it before, where somebody builds a structure that's intended for that temporary use period to be used for a dwelling, but ultimately what the requirement is at the end of that 20-year period, if it needs to be converted to a non-residential use. So into potentially a farm building that's on a concrete slab, something like that. So essentially it could be more permanent in terms of the actual structure itself, but in terms of the use, after the temporary use period expires, we require it to be changed back to a non-residential use. So I mean, your question regarding the garage, it is true, it's not something that we've seen a whole lot of on these types of applications, but the requirement would remain the same, that that particular building would have to be converted in its totality to non-residential after the temporary use period expires.
Okay, and the reason why I ask is I just want to make sure that these applicants are made clear of the conditions that are set forth. So, when I hear a garage and concrete slab, that to me is a little more of a permanent nature in my view. And then a second question, and this may not, I'm not sure who to direct this question. It was asked of me in the past regarding post office boxes. Do these applications, do they obtain a new post office box or a municipal address?
Mr. Bruder?
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. No, they would be under the civic address of the overall property. So they wouldn't be afforded a separate address for the temporary garden suite.
Okay, so thank you for that answer. Just to clarify, so there's no, should an applicant request a mailbox, they're free to do so at their own expense?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not even sure that they would be successful. I mean, I think it would have to just go through the principal address of the property.
Okay.
From the way I understand it anyway.
Okay, perfect. You just made that answer crystal clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions from council?
We have Councillor Timmers up next.
Councillor Timmers, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair McPherson, through you to Mr. Bruder or Kathleen Dale. Regarding the garden suite, so I understand that's temporary. What happens with the septic and the cistern at the 20-year point? Do they have to be removed?
Mr. Bruder?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, that is something that's definitely, usually how it works is if they can, they'll utilize the existing services that's there, but otherwise, that's something that Niagara Region becomes involved in. And if, you know, I guess if there's any additional capacity that's needed, I would suspect it doesn't necessarily have to be removed. I mean, you could have a farm building that maybe has some type of washroom facility, wouldn't necessarily need to be removed, but it's not necessarily meant for to be used as a dwelling unit either. So I don't know if that answers your question.
My other question is regarding a garden suite. So is there a limit to how many garden suites you could put on your property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, I mean, we don't typically allow multiple garden suites on one property. The temporary use would just apply to the one.
And also through to Matt Britter. So, okay, so a garden suite is temporary, but yet an accessory unit, which you could build an entire house on top of a garage, is permanent. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is, but it's a little bit of a different context when you're talking about an accessory unit where you build a dwelling, or accessory building where you build a dwelling within it. That would be probably, I think we're talking more within an urban area and something that's allowed a little more permanency. But the whole point of the garden suite is, as you know, with Greenbelt policy out in the rural areas, you're only allowed, unless it's for farm help, like your worship was referring to earlier, you can only have one dwelling on the property. So that's if there was an accessory unit, it would be a little bit more difficult in that regard out in a rural area. So there is a little bit of a difference there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. So is there any other questions from Council, Madam Clerk?
I don't see any. Oh, I do see Councilor Regima.
Counselor Regima, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm asking this question, so others might be thinking the same thing, but what do we have in place to prevent, say, 20 years from now, somebody coming forward, this unit gets built up a little bit more, gets a little bit, some work done to it. Maybe it looks a little more permanent in ways. It's been there for a long time. Nobody's really familiar with the history of the property. After 20 years, that can happen. So what do we have in place that would prevent if somebody was to come forward and say, I'd like to sever this off as a surplus farm dwelling?
Through you, Mr. Chair, well, we recognize the zoning as temporary and we enter into a temporary use agreement with the property owner. And as a component of that, we also retain a certain amount of security, $5,000. So they would have to, if they want that back, they're going to have to convert it in the future to a non-residential use. But in terms of severing it, it wouldn't really work the same way as a surplus farm dwelling because this wouldn't be considered in the same way. It's not a permanent structure, so that wouldn't be possible. We wouldn't permit that.
And a question of clarification, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
So what is it about? So 20 years from now, none of us are here. Maybe some of us are here. What is it about this structure that the red flag goes up and says, no, this is not a permanent structure. This can't be considered a surplus farm dwelling for the purposes of severing off a lot?
Well, it would have temporary use provisions on it as in terms of the zoning. We would be able to recognize that it is a temporary, the zoning amendment was for a temporary use. And like I say, we would have that accompanying agreement on file along with that deposit. So between all of those things, we would have record that this is in fact not a permanent structure, or
Okay,
not well, in terms of a dwelling unit, that is.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So just to follow, thank you, Councillor. Just to follow up on that question. So what triggers that to come back up, Mr. Bruder? What's in the up file, or what's yeah, it's sitting there on the zoning, but what would trigger that to come up in the 19th year to review it?
Well, through you to you, Mr. Chair, not necessarily. I don't know if anything gets triggered, so to speak, but like I said, we do have that that deposit that we would be holding as well. So, you know, at one point or another, if they wanted that back, they'd have to come to us and change it back. They wanted to forego that. You know, that would be something that we would have in our files. We do check from time to time, in terms of what properties have in terms of zoning on them. So I think eventually we would notice, but I don't think there's any one specific trigger. It's more if they want their deposit back, they would have to come back. And
So at 20 years, if that doesn't get changed, they forfeit that $5,000. Is that what you were saying?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. And I mean, I haven't been in a situation yet in my time at the town where the 20 years has been up. So I haven't seen exactly how that plays out, but that's the idea. Yeah.
It just would seem, appropriate that there be some kind of trigger that would bring that back up, similar to what we did with hoop houses and things like that, there is, although maybe in that case, it's the owner of the property that's coming to us. So, okay. Any other questions from council?
We have Councillor Timmers up again.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. I just want some clarity on that insurance, the $5,000. So 20 years from now, they decide that they're not going to move out and they're not going to change it back. The penalty would be they lose their $5,000, and that's it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's part of it. Another part would be if for whatever reason we were made aware that there was in fact still this dwelling there where there shouldn't be, or if we, did look back and saw that that was the case, then they'd no longer be in conformance with zoning. So we would be able to challenge the property owner as well for not being in compliance with our zoning bylaw at the time, assuming that the same kind of zoning provisions would apply in the future in 20 years' time.
Okay, thank you. I guess I just asked these questions because this is a very young couple, and in 20 years, they're still going to be a young couple. So is there a way that they can extend that time frame? And if you look at the other side, generally they're retired couples that are moving into garden suites. They're retiring. So what if they're not in 20 years, they're not able to move or they can't afford to move? What do we do with them? Are they evicted? That's just some questions I don't know the answers to. So that's why I'm asking.
Go ahead, Mr. Bruder, if you have a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I mean, I get the line of questions. Absolutely. I think, like I say, I've never been in a situation where we've had to extend one of these. I suppose it would be possible, but no matter what, then they would have to come back. We would have, again, another approval process that we'd have to follow. So, I would assume that if that situation did present itself, then we would just consider that based on the merits at that time. I guess we couldn't rule it out that there might be a possibility for an extension.
Well, we've seen extension of temporary use before. So I guess that's just why I'm asking the question, because this is a very young couple and 20 years from now will go very quickly. So I was just wondering what would happen at the end of that time period. So anyway, thank you.
Are there any other questions from council, Madam Clerk?
No more hands are raised.
Thank you very much. At this time, there are no other persons present electronically to address item 5.3 report PD-34-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by Owen Barkway. As there are no more speakers or other information for consideration to this item, I now declare this public hearing to address item 5.3 report PD-34-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by Owen Barkway closed. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Mikulik that council receive zoning bylaw amendment application PLZ ATU 202000113 in the name of Owen Barkway for information, and that a recommendation report be prepared once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. I will now ask the clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you. Councillor Brunet.
Yes.
Councillor McPherson.
Yes.
Councillor Mikulik.
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva.
Yes.
Councillor Reimer. Oh, sorry, he's declared an interest. I apologize. Councillor Rajima.
Yes.
Councillor Russell.
Yes.
Councillor Timmers.
Yes.
Mayor Easton. Sorry, I didn't catch that, Mayor Easton.
Oh, support.
Oh, thank you. And that carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We have now concluded the statutory public meeting section of the agenda. We will now continue with the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. Moving to item 6.1, delegation. We have 3 delegations this evening for Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda, joining electronically by video. Please note that each delegation may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. The clerk will be notifying you when your time limit has been reached. Our first delegation is listed as item 6.1, Kaylin Holmes, on behalf of Better Neighborhoods, who will be delegating to item 6.4, report PD-35, zoning bylaw amendment application by North Shore Homes, Inc., application PLZBA 201-90168. Ms. Holmes, please go ahead, and remember you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Councilor McPherson. Am I able to share my screen, Julie?
Yes, is it the presentation that you had sent me earlier?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. I may have to make you co-host. Just give me one moment, Kaylin. Oh no, you're good.
I'm in.
You're
okay. Very good. Everyone can see.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So thank you for introducing me. I'm Kaylin Holmes, planner and project manager with Better Neighborhoods, Inc., and the agent representing this project on behalf of North Shore Homes. Tonight, fellow councilors, you've been asked to consider this application to permit a youth center to operate in the proposed rear building, along with an accessory dwelling unit in the second level of that building. And this is to be in addition to the present residential use of the property. And the site has been designed carefully so as not to prevent such use in the future, including styling the new building as a kind of carriage house to fit in with the residential nature of the property and surrounding properties. It is no coincidence that the site, let's see, how do I change the site outlined in red here in this image, is seeking the rezoning to permit a youth center, as it is located across from the Twenty Valley School, public school, where current and future patrons will likely be attending. By locating here right across from the street, students will have convenient access to the center's programs and after-school activities. And zoning for additional uses is common along Victoria Avenue. I've highlighted a couple of those that are in proximity to the subject site here in yellow. 4034 Victoria is zoned R14, which permits the additional use of an antique shop, and 4043 zoned R110, which permits the retail sale of wood stoves. And this isn't necessarily to point to precedent so much as the fact that it's located in kind of this mixed use area. So we have the commercial business district to the south and the public library to the north. And so the character of Victoria Avenue is really well suited to the mixing of residential uses with commercial and institutional and community amenities, which together are the ingredients for what they call in the biz a complete community, by providing residents of all ages access to amenities to meet the needs of daily life in close proximity to their homes, work, and school. Following this application, I understand that council will be considering how it can facilitate the addition of affordable rental dwellings in the municipality. And within the planning profession, ADUs, as they're known, like this proposal, which is designed for rental tenure, are considered kind of a low-hanging fruit to achieving a better mix of housing options for diverse household types. And we really see the solution as a win-win-win. So, the owner gets the added income from the rental of the unit, the municipality fills the gap in the rental housing inventory, and the tenant gets to live in a unit that is really best suited to their lifestyle and budget within an existing neighborhood close to schools, shopping areas, libraries, and other such things. And I will mention that both Better Neighborhoods, Inc., which I work for, and North Shore Homes, Kevin, the applicant, are really committed to assisting with the provision of more attainable housing options in Lincoln. And it is our ambition that this project be a success so that it can be a case study for Lincoln as it works to address its gaps in rental housing inventory. Now, an accessory dwelling unit can take many forms. Carriage houses are a traditional form seen across North America, a form that's been established for hundreds of years. And in this case, the character of the proposed building is consistent with the established built form seen up and down Victoria of sheds or barns tucked in behind the main residence. These are set back from the street, but visible from the sidewalk, which allows visitors sight lines and access to the building while maintaining a consistent built form, a pattern up and down the street. In terms of the requested zoning provisions, in addition to the permitted uses, the proposal has been designed to control, limit, and otherwise prevent disruptions to neighboring properties while providing adequate parking allocation and buffers. So 3 of the 6 provisions are really just to bring the existing building into conformity with Lincoln's present zoning bylaw, and additional measures such as the cedar hedgerow seen along the southern boundary of the property and fencing along the western boundary have been added in response to some of the concerns that we heard from a couple of the neighbors over the course of this application process. Responses to other concerns that were raised have been addressed and are detailed in the staff report, which you have already reviewed. And in addition to the public information session held almost a year ago, I understand that all counselors were invited to an open house at Upper Deck to learn more about their work with youth in the community. As you know, Kevin Neeson, the applicant behind the proposal, as well as Glenn Sparks, the director at Upper Deck, representing the future tenants, are here tonight, and we are at your disposal for any further questions. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Holmes from the council?
I don't see any, Councillor McPherson.
Okay. Very good, thank you, Ms. Holmes. The second delegation is as listed on 6.2 of the agenda. Glenn Sparks will be speaking to item 6.4, reports PD-35-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by North Shore Homes, Inc. Please go ahead, Mr. Sparks, and remember you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, as already mentioned, I'm the satellite director with Youth Unlimited YFC in Lincoln. We run a youth center on Rittenhouse Road currently called the Upper Deck. We've been around for almost 2 decades, and our hope for the future is to continue on the service to kids, service to parents, and with the new A-class school that's on Victoria, we want to be of service to the teachers. So before the pandemic hit, we were of service to the school, volunteering in the school, providing after-school programs, and we just want to keep that going. And then over the last couple of years, what we've noticed was everyone's competing for donations. Charities are struggling, and the pandemic has really heightened that. And so we want to focus towards sustainability. And part of that would be having a rental property on Victoria that would help us to be sustainable long-term and also be of service to the kids. So Larry Dick, who is our chair of our committee in Lincoln, he would want me to say thank you. The Council of Lincoln has been wonderful to us over the past 2 decades, and we continue just to be thankful, full of gratitude, and to show that we want to be a continued service to Lincoln and the Vineland community. I don't have much more to say. The biggest thing I want people to take away from what I say is thank you. And we just want to be a continued service to the Lincoln community. But I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sparks. Are there any questions from council?
Chair McPherson, I don't see any hands raised.
I have one, Mr. Sparks. So a lot of emphasis put on the proximity to 20 Valley School and I guess a growth of the activity or the participants that you're expecting to see. What does that look like today with the Rittenhouse Road facility? How many kids, 6 to 8, would you see coming in?
Yeah, so for us long term, we would want to be volunteering in the school first, making connections with the kids, making connections with the teachers, and getting to know the kids that need more help, need more mentoring, need more coaching. And that's where we can move them towards a program, after school program. This will be a very well maintained program. It's not just a drop in. We don't want lots of kids showing up. We want to make sure that every youth that shows up on a given afternoon is loved, cared for, tutored, or we can just be that listening ear. We do understand, especially us being on Rittenhouse Road, we are neighbors to residents on Rittenhouse Road, and we will continue that on Victoria as well. That we want to love our neighbors, we want to show them respect, and we will not allow kids to overrun the property. Us being in proximity to the school is a good thing, because those that want to have some more programming afterwards, it's a simple walk across the street. We will get the parents' permission, and then the kids can be picked up right across the street once again when the parents come home from work. So.
Okay, so it sounds like you've engaged with 20 Valley and have started that relationship already, and you're working that side of it.
That is correct. So Peter Julke, before the pandemic, he was volunteering in the school. I can't remember the teacher's name offhand, but what he found was he was of service to 1 or 2 kids every day who needed that extra attention that the teacher cannot give. And so we're not there. We are there just as residents of Niagara, residents of the Vineland community. And how can we love and care for you today? We have no agenda. We just want to be of service.
Very good. Are there any questions, Madam Clerk?
Yes, we have Councillor Miklick, and next up after that, we have Councillor Timmers.
Councillor Miklick.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You raised that question. It got my mind thinking a little bit. I'm curious through you to Mr. Sparks. Thank you for coming, sharing your story and a bit of history. What was the attendance like prior to the expansion of 20 Valley School, and how does it relate to the attendance now with the new school? So once upon a time, it was Vineland School, a little bit considerably smaller. Now it's 20 Valley School, an amalgamation of 3 or 4 schools. What's the attendance like been lately?
Yeah, so before the pandemic, we would be hosting drop-in on Friday nights. We'd get anywhere between 20 and 30 kids. However, when we first opened our doors in 2003, we would get 50, 60, 70 kids on any given night. But I think I mentioned this the last time I met with council a couple months back. The cell phone generation came in 2008, 2009, and we noticed a dip in numbers. Kids were staying at home, engaged with their own TVs, engaged with their own devices. But what we're still finding is kids want relationships, kids want to know they're cared for, to love. And so the idea that kids just show up, that just doesn't happen anymore. So us being in good proximity to the school would help us develop relationships with the teachers, parents, and the youth to say, how can we better serve you? And so our hope would be for an after-school program to have anywhere between 10 and 20 kids. For an after-school program, we'd have we'd fall within the ratios that come from our head office and be of good service to the community.
I appreciate that response. So with that being said, is there a possibility of there being 30 or 40 kids as there was in the past?
Yeah, so for us, because we are close proximity to neighbors, we would have to have a sign-in sheet, just especially for our after-school program. It would be something that they just can't show up. We would make sure that we fall within the fire codes, the capacity of the building, and we would make sure that to be a part of the program, parents would have to sign their youth up for the program.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you again.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair McPherson, through you to the delegation. Regarding the building itself, I'm just curious why it has garage doors on it.
Is that might be a
Answer that.
for Mr. Neeson next, or?
I can jump in about that.
Okay.
Yeah, so the idea with the character of the building is that is to allow for the continued use of the residential. So if for whatever reason, 50, 100 years down the road, the youth center moves on or has bigger, you'll have to excuse me, I have a dog napping in my room right now, such is the nature of these meetings. I assure you she's been for a walk this evening. Anyways, it would allow for the continued residential use of the building, so it wouldn't take away from alternative uses in the future.
Okay,
But-
and regarding the size, so from what I've noted, it's about 1,400 square feet. So what would be on the inside of this garage? What would you be providing for the youth? There's not really space for outdoor activities. I'm just curious, what's that look like on the inside?
I'll bump that question to Glenn. Other than my knowledge is that the ground floor would be provided for the youth center and the upper floor would be for the accessory dwelling unit.
So some of the initial conversations we've had, it'd be an open space on the main floor, no walls. There'd be no points where kids can hide. We'd always have an open eye on whatever's going on, and just be a multi-use facility. Not for big events, but just whatever we can provide for the kids. Could be a board games night, could be just a fun event. Just having a big open space would provide that for us. In proximity to the youth center, there is 5 churches. So if we ever did have to do a large event, we would move that over to one of the facilities that are nearby, who the churches have been supportive of us the last few years as well, and they would be happy for us to use their facility. But to go back to that question, we just want to make sure that it's a multi-use facility, no walls, no hidden points, that we can always be in view of one another.
And from what I read in the report, so the 2 renters would be staff. The 1 staff above the youth center and a staff member living in the house. Is that correct?
Yeah, so right now, it would be, so the main house would be our staff member. If he and his family chose to move on, we would have to look at other sources. And then it would be pretty great if we could find someone up and coming, maybe not married yet, could be in need of an apartment. And that would be just something we can work through with their pay and get them started. But we don't have anyone in mind for the bachelor apartment that you're talking about. So.
And just one other question. So Friday evenings from 7:30 till 10 p.m., parents are picking up their children at the end of this evening. They're driving and picking them up.
Right now, most of the kids that come to the youth center on Rittenhouse Road do walk home. They're in close proximity to their houses. So we have very few people coming to pick up their kids.
But on Victoria Avenue is a very busy road. It's very different than Rittenhouse. So I'm just curious about that. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Are there any other questions from Council? Madam Clerk?
No other questions from council, but I do see Kevin Neeson's hand up.
Well, I'm going to move to Kevin for the 3rd delegation. So I would
That's
ask
fine.
that if Kevin's got something to share that we include it in his delegation. So our 3rd delegation is listed as item 6.3, Kevin Neeson, and will be speaking to item 6.4, report PD-35-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by North Shore Homes, Inc. Mr. Neeson, please go ahead, and remember you have 5 minutes.
You're on mute, Kevin. There you go.
All right, thanks, Julie. Yeah, so hi everybody. Happy to be here with you all and speak to this potential project. Most of what I'd like to share, I think, has been covered by both Kaylin and Glenn. Just wanted to perhaps follow up on a few of the kind of comments or questions. In regards to the floor layout, like Glenn said, it'd be very open concept of the main floor. Reason for garage doors, one is to just allow for flexible use in the future. Second, also being just maximum visibility from the street. So as a youth may be walking down the street and considering to enter the facility, they can see from a distance with the lights on what's happening there, and also draws attendees in that way. In terms of traffic, in terms of road safety, I do feel that it being right across from the school, that if there were concerns regarding traffic and safety, those would also be the same concerns for the school itself. We do want to see Victoria Avenue being a complete and safe street for our kids. We do the crosswalk directly across from the school, so anyone can press the button to crosswalk right across from this site and can safely travel across. And open any other questions that might be regarding this project. Last comment, just want to share one of the big values I see for this potential site for Upper Deck. It's just having a very accessible, very exposed third place for youth. As Glenn mentioned, many youth do walk to and from their current site, and our hope would be to maintain that and actually improve that just by maximum exposure, knowing the whereabouts, parents knowing where it is, and it being something very accessible so that students actually can go to this facility by themselves, not rely on their parents, not driving to a neighboring town, but something very close by. Yeah, any other questions? I just really welcome. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Are there any questions from council for Mr. Neeson?
We have Councillor Pachariva up.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councillor, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair McPherson. So I'm a little confused now. So Mr. Sparks stated that there would be a sign-up list that would require the kids to sign up so they'd know how many they're having. And then Mr. Neeson just said, well, the need of the garage doors would be so you could see what's happening and then roll in and check it out. So what is it? Is it a sign-up or is it a drop-in?
Mr. Neeson?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Yeah, so as Glenn explained, like he would be the one facilitating the events, speak most accurately to how they function. My comment towards garage doors and just maximum visibility is just an enticing aspect. So that, you know, if someone is walking by, they do know what's going on there. And if Glenn's comment about signing up is their common practice, well, then they would have to go according to that practice. But yeah, just the visibly aspect of garage doors, even being glass garage doors, just allows people to see that there is activity going on and something to inquire further about.
Okay, and a follow-up, if I may, Chair McPherson?
Sure, yes.
So again, if you're already established in the school as, you know, a resource, why wouldn't you want to house the program there? There's more use, there's more facilities, you know, and again, Councillor Timmers had pointed this out. Victoria Avenue is a very busy street. Encouraging kids to cross a busy street when you've got a closed area at your fingertips. I don't understand. So help me understand, because I helped establish the YMCA after program at St. Mark's School. And the reason we put it there is because it was in the school. So you had all of the amenities already on site. So.
Mr. Neeson.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, happy to answer that question. So similarly, if I work at a building, an office, if you will, it's not very cool for me to hang around with my coworkers and have a beer at work and talk about life outside of work. In a similar sense, for an 11-year-old boy to spend the day at school, to whatever degree he enjoys school, there isn't necessarily a very strong or equal draw to just kind of hang out longer at school for a program. We do value the idea of creating a third space. In the same way that you and I'd want to go to a coffee shop and hang out, would a child be interested in going somewhere else that they can consider their own, speak with peers there? In terms of after school programming, it is more accessible being at this location opposed to Rittenhouse. It is a very short walk opposed to a longer walk along Victoria Avenue. There are a lot of functions happening within the school, but that's not the sole purpose and service that Upper Deck is providing. They're trying to also create a separate place, a safe place, away from usual environments like a home life or school life, and create that third place, a place of safe sharing, safe connection, and perhaps, hopefully, a different kind of environment they can consider hanging out with friends. So as friends want to get together, opposed to just kind of wandering the neighborhood, finding interesting things to do outside their homes or school, this could be that place for them. And perhaps Glenn may want to answer more to that, but I believe that may cover most of the values. Thanks.
Counselor?
Okay, third and final question then, Chair McPherson, if I may.
Sure. Yes.
You went for another drive today to familiarize myself with the Rittenhouse Road property, and I noticed that you used to be able to drive around the back, but there's parking curbs that have been put up because it looks like there's a basketball court there and there's some road hockey net. So yeah, you've got some after school activities that youth would probably like to be involved in. It's a safe space, not a lot of traffic. It's in behind the building. How are you going to be able to do this on Victoria Avenue? Like, I see where you are as pretty darn good spot right now. So why not just a couple rental units here to address the affordability issue?
Mr. Neeson.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll invite Glenn as well just to comment after my sharing. So yeah, there is some use at the current site, making use of their space. Clearly that particular activity of a basketball net or hockey nets will be taking place at this current site. So yes, there is a good amount of space at the current site. The greater draw for the programming of Upper Deck is the exposure and vicinity to the school. And just to be clear, in the most immediate future, Upper Deck is a tenant to the property. It's not a property that they own. So they're very specific uses and functions are not an exact part of the application itself. It's more the more general use of the property. So Upper Deck is being a most immediate tenant of the property. Yeah, may not apply exactly to the application, if that is clear. And perhaps Kaylin can also comment on that. Thank you.
Do we have a comment? Kaylin?
Sorry, I'm a little bit unclear, Kevin, as to what you were asking me to comment on.
Yeah, so the nature of the application is not, though the purpose driving factor is for Upper Deck, the nature of the application is for the zoning and for the type of use of this property. So as we do describe the various uses of Upper Deck, at this point in time, they're not the ultimate owner and primary factor for application consideration.
Mr. Counselor. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Holmes, if you have a comment.
Yes, through you, Councillor McPherson. I think perhaps what Kevin is just pointing to, which I will try and clarify, is we are zoning for use here and not users, as that is what is permitted by the Planning Act.
Thank you. Counselor. All good? We will move on to Counselor Mikulik, I believe.
That's right.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Neeson, thanks for coming. I'm curious about the current use of that house at 4040 Victoria. Looking at the picture supplied, there is is that a place of business? Is that where your office is currently located?
Mr. Neeson, you are on mute. There you go.
Yep, so the prior use of the building, the property being under my ownership for some time, was my office functioning out of there. Since then we have transitioned out and is now being rented residentially from Peter Julke, who works on staff for Upper Deck.
Okay, thank you for that. So there's only one kitchen. There's only one kitchen. It's only future uses for a single family home. There's no proposal to come forward with a duplex. Can't hear.
In my own opinion, I couldn't see the possibility of more than a single family use of the house. Just given the shorter flagstone foundation, the design of the home, to me it would not be worth investing in to create more use than just a single family home. As we consider growth of Upper Deck, if there were the need to use some of the home for, say, like an office space or a meeting space, be a possibility in the future. But yeah, current use, single family residence, and we've seen the value of Peter being the occupant, so he is that front face and always around presence for functioning of Upper Deck.
So thank you for that response. Just to clarify, so there is a possibility of it being a home as well as an office down the road.
Yeah, so current and foreseeable future would be the value of it being a home rented out, helps financially support Upper Deck. But again, yes, looking at the flexibility of the property, could it be in addition or instead of single family unit, perhaps a greater use for space if there came that time.
Okay, thank you.
I think I see Ms. Holmes has raised her hand.
Yes, through you, Mr. McPherson, just to comment that the rezoning of this site is to add the youth center and accessory dwelling unit to the R1 zoning, which currently permits as of right bed and breakfasts, home occupations, and private home daycares, but would not permit an additional accessory dwelling unit in the primary residence, as I understand it.
Thank you for that. Now, I did see Councillor Regima's hand up, but it's down now. Not coming back up, Madam Clerk?
She's back in.
She's back in. Councillor?
You're on mute, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know why my hand went down. I didn't intend to do that. I have a question of clarification regarding the zoning. So is the existing use permitted within the R1 zone? I'm not clear on that. The use of a youth drop-in center.
So that's through to Mr. Bruder.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, in the R1 zone, yeah, not currently. The youth center is not listed as one of the permitted uses. That's why they're trying to add site-specific provision to allow that in the accessory structure.
Okay, now I see that in the list on the right-hand side, youth center. Okay, thank you. Just wanted that clarified. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Mr. Bruder, just more clarification on that. So we heard from Mr. Neeson that it is a use application, not a user-specific application. So this application tonight is coming at us specifically for a use center. If that was not to happen, would they have to go back? Would they have to come back to us for rezoning?
Mr. Chair, you're referring to if council's pleasure was not to approve the use of the youth center?
Has nothing to do with council's pleasure. This is a question about the zoning application. So we heard that it was a use request, not a user request. So if something was to happen to Upper Deck and they, didn't come or came for a short period of time and then the building went empty, would that then require the owner to come back to council for rezoning because of that use application?
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Chair. I think I understand what you're asking now. So if that is correct, when it comes to this planning consideration, it's for the land use itself, not for Upper Deck specifically. So this is just to permit a youth center in that particular property in that accessory structure. So if Upper Deck left for whatever reason, and then there was any other like-minded or like-oriented agency that wanted to come in and do something the same, they could do that. They wouldn't have to come back to council.
Otherwise, the change to move away from a youth center would require the owner to come back to us for rezoning.
That's correct. If they wanted to go in another direction, yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from council? Madam Clerk.
I don't see councilor members with their hand raised, but I do see Director Dale.
Director Dale, go ahead.
Actually, Mr. Bruder already answered the question in that you can't zone for a specific person or company. It has to be for the use.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. So there being no further questions, this concludes the delegations portion of the agenda. And I have a motion moved by Councilor Reimer that council receive and file as information the following delegations regarding item 6.4 report PD-35-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by North Shore Homes, Inc., application PLZBA 201-90168. Kaylin Holmes, Glenn Sparks, and Kevin Neeson. We will now consider, I'll go to the clerk for the vote.
Thank you. Councilor Brunei?
Yes.
Councilor McPherson?
Yes.
Councilor Miklick?
Yes.
Councilor Pachariva?
Yes.
Councilor Reimer?
Yes.
Councilor Rajima?
Yes.
Councilor Russell?
Yes.
Councilor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Yes.
And that carries.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Clerk. We will now move to reports. Now consider item 6.4 report PD-35-20 zoning bylaw amendment application by North Shore Homes, Inc., application PLZBA 201-90168. Do members of council have any questions or comments?
We have Councilor Miklick.
Councilor Miklick, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So my understanding is we're looking at changing the use from R1 to add a institutional component. According to our bylaw, it requires that there's sufficient or adequate buffering between R1 uses or other uses. And I'm just curious, what's considered adequate? Is 2 meters considered adequate buffering when changing a use from R1, which all the houses in that area are currently R1, similar to a house, let's say, on Stadelbauer. What would be a reasonable amount of buffering landscape?
Through to Mr. Bruder, is that where you'd like it to go?
To planning staff, to.
Yeah. Mr. Bruder?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do have certain, buffering required for certain uses when they're adjacent to residential, for sure. But I mean, some of this varies a little bit too on the extent of that particular use. In this case here, we've got a use where, yes, it's a youth center. The services provided are with respect to mentoring and some guidance and some one-on-one counseling for some of the students. There was some considerations of that back at the public meeting. We did hear some comments too from some of the surrounding landowners, which were addressed by the inclusion of some fencing and some landscape bufferings in terms of some trees planted at a strategic location near the parking area. But I would also note, when it comes to the setbacks, there is a fairly decent distance here from the accessory structure to the other property, especially in the rear yard. And there's also fencing behind there as well. So I mean, it's one of those land uses where staff, quite frankly, we did consider it closely. And I know that we're saying that, yes, it could be considered an institutional use because it's associated with students and some of those mentoring services. But at the end of the day, the compatibility impacts, especially when it comes to things like lighting and other things that would affect adjacent land uses, seem to be very minimal. We did get some clarifications as noted in the report about those types of things. So the kind of the interface seems to be satisfactory for this particular property.
Thank you very much for that answer. I just have another question with regards to her. Earlier, we heard from the delegations like 30, 40 people or children or kids. How many square feet is this, the accessory structure? What does 7.6 meters by 11 meters work out to, square feet wise?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe it translates to about 1,500 square feet. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was 145 square meters total. So that's about the size of the footprint of the accessory structure.
Is that including the upstairs, or is that 11 meters by 7.6?
No, that would be just associated with the footprint of the building.
The ground floor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a reasonable amount of space for this number of, is there a maximum capacity?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there would be. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure what that number would be at. I suspect 30 or 40 kids, that seems like a lot, but like I say, I don't know that exact figure. I'd have to get back to you on that, unfortunately, but there would be a capacity number for sure.
And I asked that question because I know the size of the home I have, and when I throw a gathering, to have that many people in my home, or even, that would be asking my house to do quite a bit. So that's the concern I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Who is next, Madam Clerk?
We have Councillor Timmers.
Councillor Timmers, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. From what I read in the report, Tuesday after school is 4 students and Friday is 7 students. So I don't know if they're going to have that kind of numbers, 30 to 40. I'm just looking at all the provisions. So they're asking for a lot of changes, a minimum front yard 6 meters is required. Like they're making changes to everything. Okay, the driveway is going from 6 meters required to 3 meters. Setback from 3 meters to 0.5 meters. There's provisions on almost like multiple things here. So also with the lot coverage, 48% lot coverage. Do all of these provisions, will they need to go to committee of adjustment, or is this part of this application? Through Matt.
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. So a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to note, you're definitely right, Councillor, that there is quite a few provisions listed, but about half of those or so, they pertain to the existing dwelling and the existing driveway, not what this development includes. It's what's already there. It's just, we've had this before. We run into certain instances when a development is happening on a site. As a measure of good practice from a planning point of view, we recognize all the existing deficiencies too that are already there. So there are some, yes, the building height is one of them, and then there's some setbacks for the parking area, which are relatively minor, the relief that they're asking. But as per your next question, all of the relief being sought here, that would be all rolled into this particular zoning application, as we've done before. Typically, when you amend the zoning like this, you would also look at the site-specific provisions too. So it wouldn't have to go to Committee of Adjustment. It just gets dealt with right here.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you, Chair McPherson.
Thank you. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the planning staff. You mentioned earlier, and I recall the public meeting a while back now. There were a number of concerns raised by neighbors, and that there were a number of provisions put in place to offset those concerns. Did planning go back and verify with those neighbors that the offsetting measures met their expectations?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we did. I mean, I think there was some back and forth from Mr. Neeson as well that we were kind of kept in the loop about. And it comes to one of these scenarios where some of the concerns that were brought forward, you know, we as staff feel like there was some progress made in that regard. Some of the neighbors, I think just in general, it's one of those things where, you know, you're kind of unsure and how it's all going to play out until it actually plays out. But from our perspective, there were some efforts made to mitigate some of the potential impacts that are the topics of concern. And there were also some clarifications provided. I mentioned lighting before. The applicants indicated there's going to be no parking lot lighting. It's going to be simple residential lighting too. That's not going to be any different from anywhere else in a residential zone. So that mitigated some of that. And then the whole privacy thing with students coming and going. Well, we've been, you know, informed that, yeah, there's going to be a sign-in list. It's going to be very controlled as to students coming and going from the property. So a lot of these things were communicated. And then obviously too, if there were any concerns by those residents, we did notify them in advance of this particular committee of the whole meeting. So if they did have any further concerns, they could definitely bring them forward. So we definitely provided them with that heads up and opportunity as well.
Okay, and thank you, Mr. Chair. One quick follow-up, and there was no further feedback after they were notified about the meeting tonight?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, staff didn't receive anything further from any of the property owners.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bruder. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other council members with questions, Madam Clerk?
No other hands are raised.
So the question I would have, Mr. Bruder, is from a noise standpoint and a potential noise standpoint, and if they're very successful in their efforts to have kids start heading over there from 20 Valley School, and they do meet capacity on any given evening, is there any consideration from a buffering standpoint for noise? And I'm thinking about basic building materials. Has that come into the discussion?
It hasn't yet, Mr. Chair. I would also note too, if there are noise concerns, we do have mechanisms to deal with those moving forward as well, which would probably feed into dictating how many students potentially could be allowed into the site. If we're experiencing some noise issues, that's something our bylaw department would definitely could and would become involved in depending on the severity. And you know, I would also note that a lot of at least what we've been told as per the services that are offered, they one-on-one counseling and mentoring. I'm not sure those will be significant in terms of noise generating, but your comment I certainly appreciate with respect to building materials and further opportunities to mitigate noise. And that's something that I can certainly discuss with the applicant after this, because they'll still have to come forward for building permit application afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bruder. So there being no further discussion, I have a motion by Councillor Timmers. The council approves zoning bylaw amendment application PLZBA 201-90168 in the name of North Shore Homes, Inc., and that council enact and pass zoning bylaw attached as Appendix B of the report PD-35-20 to amend the zoning regulations for lands at 4040 Victoria Avenue, and that council deem that zoning bylaw conforms to the official plan for the town of Lincoln. I will now ask the clerk, Madam Clerk, to call out the vote.
Thank you. Councillor Brunet,
No.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Miklick,
No.
Councillor Pachariva,
No.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
No.
Mayor Easton,
Yes.
and that carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Due to the statutory nature of this item under the Planning Act, a second motion is required. Therefore, I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell. The council considered all of the written and oral submissions and agrees with the planning report, analysis, and recommendations, and finds that, subject to the conditions of approval, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town official plan. We'll now ask Madam Clerk to call out the vote.
Councillor Brunet,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Miklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
No.
Mayor Easton,
Yes.
and that carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We will now consider item 6.5, report PD-36-20, affordable housing needs and demand study. Staff have provided a presentation to introduce the report. Director Dale is going to take us through that presentation. Please go ahead, Director Dale, when you're ready.
I just need to bring it up on my screen. Just one moment. Chair McPherson, if you can just please confirm that you see it.
I do.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen?
Okay, Julie, if you want to just go to the next page and we'll start there, that'd be great.
Thanks.
Okay, so what staff decided to do was just do kind of an overview presentation because as you will see, the report is fairly lengthy and there's a lot of tables. So the overall content of the report looks at the demand for affordable housing, and then a number of the appendices, which are a lot of tables and things like that, are in the background of the report. And the reason those are included is because if the municipality or even a nonprofit group wanted to use this information to apply for funding, such as through Central Mortgage and Housing, we need to have all of this information readily available. So in regards to affordable housing, as committee will recall, the Housing Task Force was established in 2019. Earlier this year, staff presented a report which outlined the town of Lincoln's role in providing affordable housing. Subsequent to that report, the next step was to really look at what sort of housing needs are needed in Lincoln. And so what this report does is we actually have come up with some numbers as far as what the demand is for affordable housing. If you could go to the next slide, please, Julie. So in regards to the town, we know that the town's going to continue to grow. So the population in 2006 was roughly 24,000 people. That's expected to grow to over 32,000 people in 2041. There also will be an increase in the number of households by 2041. So generally speaking, if you're going to have an increase in population households, your need for affordable housing will grow over time. The other thing that we do expect is just sort of the changing demographics in the province, the region, and Canada as a whole is going to increase over time. Next slide, please. So what that really tells us when we look at some of our population household trends is that what we're going to see probably in the future is a greater number of single person households and also couples without children. And then the average size of each household is going to decrease slightly. Every time the town does a development charges study, those are some of the figures that our consultants use. And what we do find is that every time one of those is done every 5 years, the average household size has decreased slightly. So if you look at figure 3, between 1996 and 2041, there will be definitely an increase in single person households. Next slide, please. So the town of Lincoln, its average pre-tax household income is about $50,000. That was in 2005. What we found in looking at some of the demographics in our community is about half of what we call the sales and service workers are considered a low income. And those are the types of workers that might, work in your grocery stores. They might work in some of your tourism industries. These are people that typically are working at, fairly close to minimum wage. Some of the characteristics of people with lower incomes is, they either have no certificate or just a high school certificate. Again, they work in the sales and service sector. Majority are single persons over 65 years of age. So by 2041, the largest increase in low income will be single persons. And what this does is this actually reflects some people that are on fixed incomes. There could be people that have pensions. There could be life-changing events with couples where they split up and you have a single parent with taking care of children, for example, as well as our aging population as a whole. Next slide, please. So we do have some rental stock in the town. So a lot of the information that we have comes from Statistics Canada, as well as some regional household data. So the majority of our rental stock are in single detached dwellings, and there are some rental units within what's referred to as apartments under 5 stories. So if you look at the numbers, it's almost the bulk of our rental stock right now is in single detached dwellings. Now, this might change because we have had more multiple units constructed. So we may find that, the number of rental units might increase slightly when the new Statistics Canada information is out. But the majority of these new units are in existing or newly constructed houses. We also have had a decrease of 91 units in buildings with 3 or more units. We're not sure where this is coming from, but this is based on information from Statistics Canada. So the average ownership costs to buy a house, October 2020, was close to $600,000. And that's an increase of well over $200,000 from 2015. So what we can see is that our housing prices have increased dramatically. As well, if you also look at average monthly rents, October 2019, $894, almost $900 per month, which was an increase from 2005. We do expect that, some of this information is actually higher because the difficulty with some of the Canada Merchant Housing information is they group us in with other municipalities. So you don't really get a true picture of what some of Lincoln's information is. Next slide, please. So just to explain, you'll see this term used throughout the report as well in some of the slides. So what's referred to as core housing need, this is how you describe the housing in need. So people who are in core housing need, they could fall into the three groups on this slide, one or all of them. So for example, they're paying more than their pre-tax income, like they're paying more than 30% of their pre-tax income for their shelter costs, or they can't find a place to move that in their community that would actually suit their needs. And sometimes this comes down to, trying to find things like your first and last month's rent to move, because people that are in the lower income categories, you just don't have those funds available. Sometimes people are in housing that is really, really old and dated. So there's repairs to the dwelling required. And again, they don't have the means to move to a unit that's in much better condition. And sometimes there's a problem with suitability. So for example, if you have a family situation, it's hard to find, say, a 3-bedroom unit to rent. And again, the household does not have the means to move to a suitable dwelling in their community. So for example, if a proponent, if they can't afford it, or their housing isn't inadequate, or it's not suitable, then those people would be defined as in need, a core housing need. Next slide, please. Now, Lincoln as a whole has a slightly lower core housing need than the region as a whole. And this is probably because we are a smaller municipality versus larger municipalities like, say, St. Catharines, Niagara Falls, or Welland. So incomes, which are considered between the first to fourth deciles, and that's an income level, those are considered as low income. There are more owners than renters in core housing needs. The number of renters in core housing needs will increase to 212 households by 2041. It's most common among households under age 65. And by 2041, the core housing need will follow the aging population trends. So if you look at the chart below, if you look at 2016, you see the current numbers, and then when 2041, you've got owner 398 units, renter 212 units, a total of 610 units. Next slide, please. The other thing that creates a lot of issue for people who are looking for affordable housing is the average wait time for housing is 6 to 10 years. In the region, it ranges between 5.3 to 13.1 years. And this all comes down to, it depends on what type of housing you're looking for. It's probably easier to find a small 1-bedroom unit versus trying to find a 3-bedroom unit for a family. So if you look at figure 7, if you look at for the first 1, 2, 3, 4th deciles, this basically tells you what somebody can afford to pay based on their income. If you look at the first decile, those people could only afford to pay $485 per month. And based on a survey that staff did, there's nothing advertised in that price range currently. So we do expect that the renters who are in core housing need will increase by an additional 68 people from 141 to 212 households by 2041. Older adults and seniors are most vulnerable, and this is because they're all, these people are primarily on a fixed income. Surprisingly, I actually thought the demand would be for much larger units, but when we looked at the information, the demand seems to be the greatest for affordable 1-bedroom units. And we do suspect that the need for housing is likely greater than the actual statistical information that is out there. Next slide, please. So in order to establish some affordable housing targets, what staff are recommending is we focus the efforts on housing of greatest demand. And this is based on existing and projected core housing needs and current development trends. So we looked at three rental housing targets. The low would address 75% of the projected increase, which would be 51 units. The medium is 100% of the projected increase, plus 25% of the existing need. So that's 104 units. The high is address 100% of the projected increase plus 50% of the existing housing needs, and that's 140 units. So in this report, staff are recommending that council adopt the high rental housing target of 140 units. Next slide, please. So there's a number of roles that municipalities have in providing affordable housing. Now, this chart was also included in the previous staff report. So some of the things that local municipalities can do, municipalities do the development approvals. So there are ways possibly to speed up, approval applications for, say, affordable housing projects. We can come up and facilitate some partnerships for people who actually might be interested in doing affordable housing. Some of the planning policies could include accessory apartments and possibly some more flexible zoning. Next slide, please. So our community improvement plans also play a role in attracting affordable housing. Currently, we've got 3 CIPs. There's one in Beamsville, one in Vineland, and then there's a mixed-use CIP, which covers a number of the communities. They provide both development charge grants and tax increment grants. So what staff are looking at is, in order to really focus the development charge grants on where it is really needed, we're recommending that it only be offered to rental, co-op, and nonprofit housing projects, which include affordable housing. So what that means is that will greatly reduce the number of development charge grant applications for housing, because the focus would be on providing a rental housing. In regards to our tax increment grants, we do, as I mentioned, we've got 3 CIPs. 2 of them have 10 years. One is 5 years, and you get an increase in the duration up to 10 years if you do affordable housing and or you do LEED certification. It does make sense to make all of these much more consistent. So staff are recommending in this case that we look at things like capping those at 5 years, and you're only allowed to go up to the additional years if you do some design, environmental features, or LEED certification, and you provide affordable housing. Next slide, please. We're also looking at the possibility of adjusting the CIP grant criteria for development charges for tax increment. One of those things could be a minimum of 3 unit types. So you could have, it's typical to see studio, 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom. There's the odd building that might have 3 bedrooms. So minimum of 3 types of units. Minimum of 20% of the units must be affordable. Currently, this is only in the mixed use CIP. There's no requirement for that in the Beamsville or Vineland CIP. A minimum of 10% of the units are for assisted or special needs housing. They must meet the design criteria. In addition to that, another option that staff can also look at is our zoning bylaw currently permits an accessory apartment unit within any dwelling where a single detached dwelling is permitted. There are a lot of probably some legal, some maybe not so legal accessory apartments out there that probably need some improvements to bring them into compliance with building and fire code requirements. So staff are recommending that we look at whether any sort of grant should be offered to encourage additional rental units to bring them into compliance with building and fire code requirements. Next slide, please. So this report looks at, what are the needs in Lincoln? There are still a number of additional steps for this. So some of the next steps, including facilitating partnerships, that would be identifying any surplus lands. They could be private, they could be town-owned lands, they could be the BDSS lands. Identify some suitable housing providers that might want to work with the town and bring these organizations together. There's also an advocacy portion to that. So traditionally, the region is the group that provides affordable housing and housing. So there are things that, the town could do, like working with the region in providing affordable housing, working with Central Mortgage and Housing and other organizations for funding, so provide support to housing proposals. That could be just, a planning application. And also, I think there has to be a public education piece, because it's really important to explain to the community the importance of providing housing for everybody in the income continuum, because people who are working in our service sector, they need to be close to jobs, as an example. Next slide, please. So staff are recommending that council adopt the affordable rental housing target. We're recommending that the community improvement plans be amended to assist in meeting the targets. And those will mean that the CIPs will become much more stringent. We need to identify qualified housing providers to build and operate new affordable housing. Work with local groups to identify potential resources in Lincoln, potentially other parcels of land. We'll have to advocate, again, continually with the region and senior levels of government for funding, and also continue to look at tools for implementation. Those could be changes to the zoning bylaw, land acquisition, such as BDSS. Next slide, please. The other thing I also wanted to mention before we get into questions is when you're doing an affordable housing project, you don't, in the past, what usually happened is you'd have a bunch of buildings all in one location that provided affordable housing. And it was all affordable housing. What is being done these days is when you build buildings for affordable housing, you would have some units that are what you call rent geared to income, which, they could have a different level of subsidy, for example, and you could have other units that are actually paying market rents. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Director Dale. Very, very thorough report and presentation. Lots of moving parts in it. So I'm going to turn it over to Council for any questions or comments. And I see Councillor Regima is first up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the report. I wanted to say something as chair of the Housing Task Force. There's a number of us that were on the task force and have done a lot of work over the last year, including staff as well. And we're happy to see this report come forward. And there's a lot of information in there, a lot to consider. So what we're talking about here is putting policies in place that encourage those that might be interested in building housing to build housing that will hopefully ultimately be affordable, more affordable than what we are seeing lately in our community. The first thing people struggle with when we start talking about quote unquote affordable housing is, what is that? Well, it's a lot of things, but the conversation goes around and around it until it comes back to the fact that there's all kinds of housing being built all over the place, but how does it become affordable under the different types of definitions of affordable? What is affordable? Is it affordable because I can buy it as a young person or a family purchasing my first home? Is it affordable to a young person or a family purchasing their home? oh, sorry, if it is affordable to a young person or a family purchasing their first home, why is that? Is it something that the local government has done? Is it something that the federal government has done? Or is it because the market has gone that way? Well, most of the time the answer is yes, it's because the market has just gone that way. And in Niagara, the market has not gone that way. Demand to live in Niagara has increased significantly in the last 3 to 5 years, to 10 years even, partially because the Greater Toronto area is filling up, partially because the announcements relating to GO coming out this way, but even more so since COVID. Fact is, a lot of people want to live here, and that's what's driving up, and that's driving up the cost of putting a roof over your head in Niagara. So who is it that needs housing options? Well, all kinds of people need housing options: young families, mature families, single young people, single older people, seniors. We know that. We know that housing comes in all shapes and sizes, and that was driven home to us over and over again as a housing task force. We do know that the needs are broad. So what we did as a task force was to welcome as many service providers and community groups and others in the community that have the information to come and share with us. We heard from Adrian Jigley, Commissioner of Community Services in the Niagara region, Jeffrey Sinclair, Homelessness Action Plan Advisor for the Niagara region, Donna, I can't pronounce her last name, I apologize, Chief Executive Officer of Niagara Regional Housing, Carol Fuhrer, Executive Director of Community Care of West Niagara, Laurie Beach, Executive Director of Bethlehem Housing, Sarah Phillips, Principal of Sarah Phillips Housing Consulting Services, Mike Lethby of Raft, a Transitional Housing Support Worker from Jillian's Place, Youth Zone Director Serena Lee, John Van Wiley of West Niagara Affordable Housing, and Bruce Wallace of Niagara West Affordable Housing, and also Jamie Shipley from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. What we wanted to do is learn as much as we can about the issue, and we discovered, of course, that it's so complex that the most important place to start is to understand the problem itself and try to define the problem itself and take it from this giant issue and pare it down into something we can get our hands on. What we know is that making housing more available to people is a goal that requires a multifaceted approach. What is it that we can do as a municipality to assist, and why would we want to do that? Well, we want to do that for a number of reasons. Some of us have sons and daughters that are getting to the age or are at the age where they'd like to purchase their own home or rent their own home, but maybe they can't afford what they see available in Niagara. And why can't they afford it? Partly because the market has driven up the cost, but maybe they're not able to work around here. Maybe that's a point. And Kathleen Dale did raise that point during her review of the report just now. So that brings me to my next point, and that is, if there's housing for those that want to stay in Niagara and work in Niagara, then that supports the local economy. Businesses need a workforce, and if our younger people and our brightest and best are hanging around long enough to be old enough to get seriously into the workforce and or complete their education, but are then up and moving away because there's nowhere to work, that leaves one of the boxes unticked on the list of those looking to establish their businesses in Niagara. If there's no workforce, partially because there's nowhere for our workforce to live, then that decreases the likelihood of us developing a strong, vibrant local economy. The local economy needs a workforce. We've heard this over and over again from our tourism-based businesses in the Lincoln area, wineries, etc. They need for their workforce to be able to live in the area, plain and simple. Why else would we want to have a hand in encouraging, if not ensuring, that there be quote unquote affordable housing in our community? Well, for the plain simple reason that we want to be able to keep our families together. As our parents age and want to downsize, there needs to be options. We've been hearing for years that there just are not enough options for downsizing, particularly in West Niagara. So to my question as to why we as a lower tier municipality want to ensure that we have a variety of housing and a certain portion of that. So to my question about why we as a lower tier municipality would want to ensure that we have a variety of housing and that a certain portion of that can be considered quote unquote affordable, is that we want to be able to keep families together. We want people that live here now not to be priced out of continuing to live here. And we want to provide local businesses with a workforce. So back to what is it that we can do as a municipality to assist in increasing housing options. This report that's before us tonight is looking at providing incentives for those that want to build housing within Lincoln to choose to build rental housing in particular, and to build that housing with the intent to hold it and continue to rent it out for an extended period of time. The report also focuses on incentivizing the creation of smaller units, 1-bedroom units. And I suspect this comes partially from information that we received from the region that says that the data shows that the greatest need in the region is 1-bedroom units. So I want to thank staff for bringing the report forward. No small feat, as I said before, to whittle down the information down to something manageable and make recommendations on actionable items. A lot of work has come before this, and it has a significant amount of detail, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of good questions on the recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I will now move to Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. So thank you for the report. I think Councillor Gemma outlined a lot of great points about the need in the region for this type of, or these types of building units. My question is, when I look at the data provided in this, I'm seeing some things that contravene what is being said within the report from the region. So the first thing, I'm just looking at page 5, said households in Lincoln have been a much higher average income than most households in the region by nearly 25% above the regional average. Lincoln has also had fewer lower income households than the regional average. So with that being said, is this more of a regional issue that the town of Lincoln is trying to address? Or is this a Lincoln specific issue that we are trying to address? And before I get to that, just one little other notation in that. In that core household rating, is that Lincoln has fewer than 4.4% in core housing needs, where the region has 12.8%. That's on page 10. So again, is this a regional issue that we're trying to help assist with, or is it a Lincoln issue? Through you to the staff.
Is that true to Director Dale?
Either your Director Dale or maybe the CAO.
Maybe Mr. CAO, either or.
I can start if you like.
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, so this report is looking at the numbers for Lincoln. We do know that region-wide, this is an issue. We do also know that we are one of the municipalities that does have much higher income levels than some of our other municipalities in the region. However, just because we've got some higher income levels doesn't mean that there aren't a number of people at the bottom end of the income level that also need affordable housing.
Okay, thank you, Director Dale. Mr. Chair, through you. So with that being said then, in this report, where would I find the information that shows specifics on the people that are in that actual lower tier vulnerable state that are trying to find housing? Is there a list? Is there, I see a number of charts and tables that show different various income levels, but like how many of adult ages would actually be in that lower income bracket that needs this housing or will need it soon?
Ms. Dale, is that information available, or is I see Josh nodding his head.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to defer to Josh if that's okay, if you don't mind.
Sure, no, absolutely.
Put all the charts together.
Go ahead,
Thank
Josh.
you. Thank you, Chair. Through you to the rest of council. So so informally, the region has created this CanSIA data that they had a private consultant create using various data sources from Statistics Canada, their own data. And so what we have is core housing need. That is the most high, most vulnerable group that is in need of affordable housing. So if you look at table 4, you've got 291 owner households that are quote unquote in core housing need, and 144 renter households that are in core housing need. Now, because Statistics Canada because we're a small municipality, and Statistics Canada kind of takes a small data set for Lincoln because of its relatively modest population, they extrapolate that data. What that does is perhaps undercounts Lincoln's actual need. So using all the other metrics that we have, we know that rent is most likely higher than what the CMHC has indicated for Lincoln. As the Director of Planning, Ms. Dale, said, we're lumped in with places like Niagara-on-the-Lake, also West Lincoln, Pelham, even Port Colborne. So the official statistics that we're seeing that are used to calculate core housing need are from 2016. They're also not reflective of the reality of Lincoln. So likelihood, it's higher than what the 144 renter households are. We also, as part of this study, I also reached out to a number of the organizations that the Affordable Housing Task Force has interviewed, and their response is that affordable housing is there's a chronic shortage of it in Lincoln, and that any type of affordable housing that's built in Lincoln would be filled up virtually immediately. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'd be free to answer any of the questions you have about the data as well.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Josh. My last question before I jump out and then jump back in later.
Councilor Russell, I just have CEO Kirkopoulos that's got his hand up. I wonder if he's making a comment to your previous questions.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councilor. I mean, more of a general comment. I think Josh answered the specific questions around the data that we're looking at. But I would also suggest data on page 6 of 19 that, the one that jumps out, I think, to me, when you look at point 2 there, a 34% increase from 455 to 820 households is something that we need to start preparing for. And I think sometimes we look at data like this, we look at information like this, and we think, okay, it's a decision point for the future. But I think we all realize, and I've had a number of conversations with all members of council almost about affordable housing, and when we can put that marker in the ground and get moving, I think we all realize how long it takes. But specific to I think Councilor Russell's question around, is it the region, is it ourselves? I would say it's both. Lincoln residents need a mix of housing options. Regionally, I think we all know and have heard there are needs for affordable housing options, and some communities need it a lot more. But if I go and I look to our businesses, which are stakeholders that we're reaching out to, what they're telling us is that they need a mix of employees. And if there's no affordable housing options, it's difficult to staff many of our businesses, as we've seen here, that are really service oriented. So thanks, Mr. Chair, for those opportunities to provide.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Go ahead, Councilor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one follow-up, quick one to that one point that our CAO made. So that number of low-income households is expected to increase 34% from 455 to 820. That's the only place in this report that I could find that referenced. Is there a table that actually shows the context of where that information was pulled?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, I'll let Josh, I think, point to you where the data is and how we tried to summarize that data in the report.
Josh, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Councilor Russell. So there are a number of tables that we've used, both in the report and in the appendix. Tables 4, 5, and 6 kind of outline the need in a more descriptive manner. So in table 5, it outlines core housing need in 2016 and the projected need in 2041 by household type. So what you've got is, and we've split it up by owner and renter because our emphasis is on renter households. There may be some opportunity for owner households, but our real focus on the targets at least was for renter households, just because of the lack of purpose-built rental ownership or purpose-built rental units that have been constructed in Lincoln. So in table 5, the greatest, you will see that the greatest increases for single-person households. There'll be slight increases or no increases for couples with children or without children. And then in table 6, you'll see that how core housing need will increase or change by age cohort. So from 15 to 34, 35 to 64, and 65 and above. So that kind of breaks it down in a more molecular level, more descriptive level as to how it will change and what kind of dwelling units will be needed as well.
So again, going back to the point, so the 455 to 820, a 34% increase, where did that come from? Like I've scoured this a few times and I don't see it anywhere on there. I understand what you're referencing with tables 4, 5, and 6, but it's not on there. I'm just trying to figure out what the context is behind that that point, because I think it's pretty important.
Are you specific, through you, Chair, are you specifically referencing where the figures are located in the actual report, or how the data was tabulated?
Well, in the report on page 6, it does say, the second point in, I believe, Lincoln's low-income households are expected to increase 34% from 455 to 820.
So through you, Chair, so just because one household is in or has low income does not necessarily mean that they're in core housing need. That figure there was just to outline that there will be an increase in the number of low income households. And that's just to provide a greater context of how people who might be at highest risk of core housing need, how their numbers are expected to change over the future. So not all households in low income are in core housing need, but they are at the greatest risk of experiencing core housing need, just because if rents increase or they're evicted from their dwelling or a number of changes. So that's where that figure comes from. It's based on, they're basically in the first to fourth income decile.
Okay, I won't belabor it. I think the CAO has a point. But
If I could, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, there's kind of a companion document that, I want to say is hundreds of pages in length. It's the one that Josh and Kathleen both referenced. And I think if you looked at the crude data and started extrapolating and doing some modeling, that's where a lot of this data is from. I can definitely make sure members of council have that. I know a few members of our housing committee have it. I know Councillor Brunet has it because we shared it in a meeting with one of our planning consultants externally that was looking at affordable housing and providing us some guidance. So I can definitely make sure all of council has that kind of companion document that is inundated with a lot of data where a lot of this was extrapolated from and modeled from.
Okay, I'll jump out.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. So, Madam Clerk, who is next in the queue?
We have Councillor Brunet up next, Chair.
Councillor, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so, I don't want to belabor Councillor Russer's comments, but it's really the crux of my my focus. What I've struggled with for the last 3 years is the data. And I have seen the crude data, but the crude data really doesn't really tell me what I want to know. So I appreciate what staff has done here. But I guess what I'm struggling with, and this is no disrespect to anyone, there's no magic wand here when looking at this. But I really feel that for us to understand the needs of our community, that we need to sit down and look at the data that Bethlehem Housing has or YWCA has, and not be looking at data that has been accumulated that's maybe 6 or 10 years old. And when I say that, I'm even struggling with, a lot of us just recently sat through a presentation by a Brock professor that was done in collaboration with YWCA. And everything I've seen about wait times in Niagara are up around 14 years. And the information we're seeing here is 6 to 10. So right there, I'm struggling with wait times. So, I'm just, all I'm saying is that for us to make informed decisions, the data has to be relevant to Lincoln. And, it's just, I'm struggling to see that. Through you, Mr. Chair, I just have one question for possibly Director Dale. And Kathleen, you've been around for a long time. And I couldn't agree more when you say that advocacy with the region is paramount. How many times in the last 5 years, Kathleen, has the town of Lincoln, in your knowledge, had reached out for advocacy with the region in terms of affordable housing?
Ms. Dale?
Mr. Chairman, it's probably a hard question to answer, but I know through various means we have had consultation with regional housing, whether it's when we were reviewing some of our CIPs, when there was funding out for affordable housing projects. So we have done some consultation with regional housing over the years.
In the last 5 years?
Last 5 years. I do recall regional housing coming to one of our presentations on CIP incentives a couple of years ago.
You know, I'm very appreciative of the work that the Housing Task Force has done for the last 18 months. I'm very appreciative that it seems like we're moving in a direction where we're all on the same page, that we care and we're committed to doing something. But I really believe for us to be serious about this, we need to have the data. And I'm sorry, but I'm not seeing the data here. Thank you, Chair.
Point taken. Thank you, Councillor. Next up, I believe, is Councillor. Before we go to that, we have Josh with his hand up. Is that to Councillor Brunet's comment? Go ahead, Josh.
Through your chair to Councillor Brunet, I just wanted to address the data issue. This is the region's own data, and then one of the complexities of working in the region itself is that it's a very diverse area. So in generally speaking, those areas with 14-year wait lists are in the higher urban areas, higher density, higher population areas like Niagara Falls, Welland, and St. Catharines. So this, I too had similar concerns about the data that was provided by the region. It seemed it was outdated. It's based on the 2016 census, so there are some limitations in that regard. And to supplement that data, I did speak with Bethlehem, and I spoke with Niagara West, with Carol from a number of organizations here in Lincoln to try and better understand that housing need, because intuitively, with the way that rents are increasing, the lack of purpose-built affordable housing that's been built in Lincoln, you'd think that there'd be a higher need being shown, but unfortunately, because of some of the data limitations that the private consultants used when creating the region's data to provide a better comparison of how affordable housing needs compare over the various lower tier municipalities, it was somewhat limited. So your point is taken, and in all likelihood, the need is actually much higher. And so if you'd like, I'd be more than willing to have a further chat with you on some of those limitations as well.
Thank you, Josh. I'm going to move to Councillor Mikulik now. Councillor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I sat on this affordable task force, housing task force as well. There is a lot of information to digest. Concerns I have, the concerns I have, or the thoughts I have is that with relation to Lincoln, the majority of our rental stock is single detached homes, making up, according in 2016, 496. So, and that, proportionately speaking, is 39%, if I'm looking at table 5. So I'm just curious, you know, given the fact that the real estate values have gone up so much, and the other thing is the CIP index dictates what a landlord can charge as far as rent increases. So what did staff look at how we can retain these single detached rental homes, given the fact that I feel as though there's many landlords that are currently cashing out in this robust market. And I say that because I've heard recently of a woman that was renting a house for a long time, was paying an affordable rate for that home. However, the landlord sold, cashed out, and that individual was financially steered or pushed into a single bedroom apartment for affordability factor only. So did staff look at what we can do to retain that single detached home and keep that? What did we do to look at keeping that rental stock from evaporating?
Thank you, Councillor. Director Dale or
Mr. Chairman, I'll probably try and answer this the best I can. One of the things, municipality, we really have no control. If somebody owns a house and they're renting it and they decide to sell it, we have no mechanism at the local level to control that. It's just if for example, the municipality set up a nonprofit housing corporation, or you enter into an agreement with a nonprofit housing corporation, in those situations, you can require agreements that they provide the units at an affordable rate for a specified time frame. But when it comes to the private market, the municipality has no way to control that.
Councillor?
I appreciate that answer. But in looking further into this, there's a document, the Municipal Tools for Affordable Housing. Is there not a possibility or a way of creating a new property class that could perhaps address this? So what it is landlords traditionally live in their own home. That's their owner-occupied home. What are properties classified that are not owner-occupied? What's the classification of those homes, aside from R1, R2, R3, etc.?
Is that through to Director Dale?
Ms. Dale.
Mr. Chairman, I'll do my best to answer this. So if you have a single detached dwelling, it's going to be assessed as a single detached dwelling, regardless of whether it's owner occupied or rented out. When you get into multi-residential categories, there are different assessment categories for those types of units. For a single detached dwelling, it's going to be assessed based on its value, and then so that's how that would get valued. So that would have its type of tax class, but multi-res has a slightly different tax class. But it isn't necessarily. It's based on the type of unit versus whether or not it's rented or owner occupied.
Okay, so I appreciate that answer. So currently, there's no incentive for landlords of individual properties that would say house a family of 6 or 7.
Mr. Chairman, so there are other options. There are programs, I understand it, with regional housing. So a private owner of a property could make arrangements with regional housing for things like rent geared to income. So for example, somebody might be renting it for, I don't know, maybe the market rent is $1,000, but they can only afford to pay $6,000. The region would pick up the difference, and there would be some sort of agreement entered into. So there are programs available through regional housing.
Okay. Councillor? Thank you.
Thank you.
All good? Thank you. So there are councillors that have already asked questions, so I'm going to move to Councillor Timmers. There are councillors in the queue that would like to ask another question, but I'm going to go to Councillor Timmers. Council?
Thank you very much, Chair McPherson. Well, I'm very, very happy to see this report here tonight. It's a very good report. I did note that the data is, 2016. I think this is a very good start. Approving this tonight, it's not carved in stone from what I understand. So through to staff, with these next steps and the units that are laid out here tonight, are we able to update this, change this as we move forward? Because I think if we really do get down to the raw data, the numbers are higher than what we realize. There's a lot of people who are falling through the cracks that we are not aware of in our own community. So just through to staff, how flexible is this if we approve this tonight? Can we change those numbers? Can we change the units? Like, that's what I'm looking for.
Ms. Dale?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So what the staff are recommending is it's a housing need target. As you know, there's always new information that becomes available if we find that the need is higher. There's no reason why staff can't bring a report back and have these numbers updated.
Okay, very good. And just one other point regarding the CIPs and the DC grant and the TIG program, these are going to be qualified organizations who build low-income housing. They would be qualified to be able to apply for these grants. It's not going to be someone just putting up a building. These are going to be qualified builders that are coming in or that we attract, correct? How do we vet them? I guess that's where I'm trying to get. How are we sure?
So, Mr. Chairman, so if we do amend the CIP to, for example, only offer, say, a development charge credit where they're providing rental housing, anybody could apply for this to build this type of project. However, they're going to have to enter an agreement with the municipality that ensures that that the rental housing component is maintained over the long term at an affordable rate, and they're going to have to provide some paperwork to that effect. I mean, that's how you would implement an agreement. You would ask for information on an annual basis. It is going to be more work down the road, but you do have to put in the steps to make sure you monitor it.
So it would be a long-term commitment.
That's correct.
On their part.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, councilors. And I'm going to move to Mayor Easton now. Before you start, Mayor Easton, I see Mike Kirkopoulos has got his hand up. Mr. CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a few comments, maybe to pick up on where I think Councillor Timmers was, and maybe just to remind council what we're asking you for tonight. And I think the councillor highlighted the importance of numbers, as has Councillor Brunet. I mean, this is a target. If we start, we are by no means anytime in the immediate short term able to construct 140 units as they're laid out there. I think we look at opportunities like BDSS, which still is a ways away to do some of that. But I think we've always looked at, even if we look at the existing properties we have in the community or potential opportunities, constructing an affordable rental housing opportunity likely finds us doing something that's maybe in the 50 to 60 to 70 units, not something of this scope or of this size, and potentially could be even smaller. So I want to remind council that's what we're asking you for in terms of the direction and the recommendations. And of course, there's more questions should council go in that direction. And as it relates, I think specifically to the CIPs, if anything, and again, it may put council's mind at ease, we're going to make our CIPs more restrictive versus less restrictive than what they are. That doesn't stop us from advocating with the region. That doesn't stop us from reaching out to partners and looking for other opportunities. But I just wanted to remind council where we are. We're also allowing you to do, allow us to come back with some more analysis. So just a few comments, but again, staff are here to answer questions, and I suspect you'll have more before we get to the end of this report.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've had quite a bit to do with the alternative service delivery model at the region in terms of housing, and so I certainly am well aware of how complex this entire subject is, and sometimes it is a bit like scooping fog. However, the numbers in question that come from the region are the numbers that the region uses to make application for a wide variety of grants and other funding sources. And so I have to believe that these are the numbers that everybody is working with. If 2016 is the benchmark, it is out of date, there's no question about it. And they do special counts for the homeless numbers, but they are using those numbers, as is everyone else. So we would have to look at, certainly look at other sources. And I think that Councillor Brunet's comment about the Bethlehem numbers or any agency like that could be Indwell. It would be interesting to go back and maybe have another look at those. One of the areas that I found most interesting, and Mr. Chair, I'm being very cautious now because I know what we are being asked to approve here tonight. And so let me ask this question. In order to do a further analysis of the information and the implications of the information on the 6 bullet points on page 6, particularly the one that expects the number of low-income households to increase, regardless of what that number is, it would appear to me as though we have an impact of an entire generation on the future. So we had, and I've heard this comment made a number of times, multiple times, that when housing prices were very low in Lincoln, there were a lot of single parents that moved into this area to rent houses. And they were very, very inexpensive. And so when you look at the Grimsby numbers, they're quite different than the Lincoln numbers. And that apparently was one of the reasons. If it were in use, it would have to be validated. So let's call that generation 1. And most of those people now are in their late 50s and into their early 60s. So if we are growing our number of low-income households, then are they because people are continuing to move in a very, very hot market? I doubt that. Or are they the second generation of those that came in when housing was very inexpensive? Regardless, access to education, access to childcare, access to the skilled trades, and then access to jobs creation, access to transportation. If you just look at about a dozen things on the list of the determinants of health, you can see that we're not only going to have to build housing and the right kind of housing, but we're going to have to figure out how some of these other needs are going to be met. It would be easy to say that this is a responsibility of the region, and it is, but it does have to do with hub creation. My concern is if we don't address this, if we don't start doing some pretty deep dive analysis on this, and I think this is work that where Ms. Furrer comes in and some of the updated work that she does, I think that we'll have longer term problems down the road. We have to try and deal with this issue of low income households. I'm talking about newly created ones, and how do we avoid that? Not looking for an answer tonight. I just want to put on the table that there are other risks that go along with this that we're not going to be able to deny. We will have to do some pretty, significant partnerships going. So tonight, it's a matter of the number, 140 units, or do we need to put the number in there, or do we just begin to look at affordable rental housing consisting of so many bachelors and so many one-bedroom dwellings and so many two-bedroom dwellings and some three-bedroom dwellings? I'm comfortable with these numbers. Why? Because this is the formula I've been listening to for about 4.5 years now at the region. This is the ratio. Males, one of the highest risk groups are males with dependencies, alcohol, drugs, youth with alcohol, drugs, and they need a place to live. Very, 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 very short supply. So I'm not getting too wound up about these being absolute numbers, but I'm happy with that combination of housing units. And so I can see the value in that. I think that's all I really want to say, Mr. Chairman, because we really do need to deal with what we're being asked to deal with. I guess the other question, Mr. Chairman, that maybe if it's not going to be answered tonight, it needs to be answered soon, is whether it's time to move from a task force to an advisory committee of council. And I'm not suggesting we even talk about it tonight, but these are key decision points now that will allow us to go forward. And as we go forward, we can deal with the issue of whether we consider the numbers to be valid or not. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I am moving to Councillor Russell. Is that right, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Chair, it is.
Councillor
Thank
Russell.
you. Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions. First question would be through you to the staff. I'm wondering how Utopia, Prudhome's, Bench Condos, and the Ticcarelli property uptown factor into these numbers.
Ms. Dale.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, the Bench Condos, they have not applied for any grants for affordable housing, so those won't be affordable housing units. The Mr. Ticcarelli's application as well does not have an affordable housing component to it. The Centerville project that Mr. DeSantis did had some affordable housing units, and the New Horizon development on Green Lane will have some affordable housing units.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, through you to to clarify, I didn't mean whether or not they were applying to meet certain criteria. I'm just wondering whether or not any of the units in those buildings would fill some of the voids being asked in this report.
Ms. Dale.
Mr. Chairman, I would say it would address some of the needs, but maybe not. The difficulty is I think we're trying to focus on rental housing. New Horizon Homes, for example, is ownership housing, and so is the Centerville project. So those are ownership. So those are affordable ownership housing that they're creating. It will not, I don't believe it'll address the need for core housing, need for rental housing, because even if those condominium unit owners decide to rent their units, the market rents are going to be fairly high. So probably not on the rental side.
Okay. Mr. Chair, through you, so I took a glance at the Niagara Region's current CIPs and their current rebate programs. I don't see anything in there that addresses anything to do with affordable housing. I know that they have their own separate programs that they run internally, but I don't see anything on their standpoint as far as either a tax increment grant or a DC charge that specifically addresses this. Is that correct through you to Director Dale?
So, Mr. Chairman, in regards to the CIPs, what the region does is they do, so for some of the CIPs, they do match our funding. As I stated in the report, one of the grants that's available in 2 of the CIPs is an affordable housing grant, but the region doesn't provide any matching funding for that particular grant.
Okay. Then through you, Mr. Chair, last point before I jump out and come back in. Again, this again kind of goes to Councillor Bernay's point earlier about that need for advocacy with the region. I'd like to put a motion on the floor for our CAO and staff to engage the region and advocate for an incentive plan that addresses the need for affordable housing, which actively addresses the needs of all our vulnerable population.
So you'd like to do that after our discussion? Is that what you're saying?
Right now, if that's okay.
So is that in place of the motion that we've got, or in addition to the motion? In addition? It's not an amendment to the motion that we've got. It's a separate motion. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. So there's a motion moved by Councillor Russell, and can I just repeat that just so that we're all clear?
Please do.
Thanks. That the CAO and staff engage the region and advocate for an incentive plan that addresses the need for affordable housing, which actively addresses the need for our vulnerable population. Does that capture that, Councillor Russell?
Yes, Madam Clerk.
Okay. And I will call the vote. Councillor Brunei.
Point of, before we go.
Sorry, we can
Madam-
discuss the motion
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
want.
please, if there's any questions, the motion, I have one, but
Yes.
if there's, so we just heard that the region does support the CIPs through their contribution. Is this in added to those? Is that what we're asking for? We're asking for more than what they're doing today. Okay. I'm seeing a nodded head by Councillor Russell. Are there any other questions to the motion?
So Chair McPherson, I do see the CAO has his hand up to speak, if that's okay.
Sure. Yep, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the council, I think it's a timely motion in the sense of, as we come out to the other side of COVID, the region did start an exercise prior to COVID looking at redoing their CIPs and incentive programs, and Mayor Easton, may be able to validate that, but I see a lot of our staff nodding. Their focus is going to be on affordable housing, employment lands, and I think the other category is brownfield. So they're really focusing on 3 key areas moving forward. But I think a motion from us validating the importance on the affordable housing piece will be I think important, and I think further add that voice to the conversation that we're already having at a staff level.
Very good. Madam Clerk?
So Councillor Russell, you have your hand up, but I see Councillor Rajima. Are you speaking to this motion in particular, Councillor Rajima?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So my question is, I know we've talked tonight, it's been mentioned a couple of times that what does affordable mean? And in order for us to call something affordable, we can incentivize that rental units be built, but we have to make sure that there's something tied in there to make sure that these units that are rental units remain affordable for the long term, because they hit the market drives them way up, and it is what it is. So this is a question, I guess, to Councillor Russell's motion, and that is that do we know that the existing criteria in any regional CIPs that promote affordable housing, do they have criteria in there that agreement be put in place that these rental units continue to remain affordable in the long term?
I think if I heard the Councillor Russell correctly, he's not seeing affordable housing in any of the CIPs at the region. The only place they show up is in our CIPs.
Oh,
correct?
Yes.
Ms. Dale?
I thought they were incentivizing them at one point.
Maybe to help clarify, Mr. Chairman, so the region doesn't specifically have any CIP programs. What they do is they either match or they don't match the local municipalities' CIPs. So that's how they do the CIPs. Regional housing, which are not part of a CIP program, has other housing programs that they run. But in regards to CIPs, there are no regional CIPs at the moment. They're all local municipal CIPs where there's matching funding for some of the CIP programs. I hope
Okay,
that
so
helps.
so thank you for that. So the motion would be to ask that the region start to or continue to match any CIPs that we put in place related to affordable housing.
I don't think it's necessarily just that. I think it's an overall support from the region, and I'm speaking from Councilor Russell, and he can clarify, but an overall support from the region for affordable housing in Lincoln.
And just to further, you're exactly correct, Mr. Chair. And also, again, I specifically called out this point in the motion so that it actively addresses the needs of our vulnerable population. So there's one thing to create affordable housing. There's another thing to make sure that our vulnerable population is addressed and able to get into that affordable housing. And I think that's where that advocacy is highly needed from our standpoint, and probably from other local area municipalities as well in the region.
All good, Councilor?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Is Councilor Bernays speaking to this motion? Is that?
That's right.
Where I see his hand? Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I really like the way this conversation's going. I just want to make sure that when we look at social housing, when we look at regional housing that's available in the town of Lincoln currently right now, I look at the Queen Street building, I look at the Green Lane building. Those are buildings that were built 25 and 35 years ago. So I think this is really, really important, and it's kind of been really top of my mind is that, when we talk about having a discussion with the region, one thing to advocate for funding, but it's another thing to talk about, to really understand, where the region sees their role in Lincoln and where they look at those buildings. And as Councilor Russell has said, what happened and what the needs for affordable housing was in Lincoln in 1995 is not what it is now in 2020. So I really like the way this conversation's going. And if this motion includes really having a fulsome meeting with the region and the proper partners to collaborate, to really understand where they see themselves in Lincoln with affordable housing, with those buildings and beyond, I applaud this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. I see, Kathleen, do you have comment to that?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I forgot to lower my hand.
Mary
Mary Easton.
Mary Easton, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point out that I believe that all the units, Queen Street, John Street, a number of properties on RJ and in that area, these are all being managed by Niagara Regional Housing. And because I've had, and the reason I know this is because there have been issues in those buildings, and I've had to deal with the board members from Niagara Regional Housing. So they are in the community. They're anxious to work with us. And so it's a matter of sitting down and determining what the needs are for Lincoln and seeing where we can begin having those conversations. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Councilor Mikulik, is this comment to the motion?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I feel also that we talk a lot about the creation of affordable housing, but I'd like to see if we can discuss with the region as well, the retention or what we can do for the retention of the current affordable housing that I'm certain we're seeing disappear before our eyes. And 2016, that's 4 years ago. We don't know what the data is 2020 or 2019 even, as far as what the rental stock is or is projected to be. So never mind affordable rental stock at all. So those are, I think, conversation with the region with regards to that would be, well deserved. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to the vote. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. So moved by Councillor Russell. Councillor Brunet.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Yes.
Councillor Miklick.
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva.
Yes, please.
Councillor Reimer.
Yes.
Councillor Rajima.
Yes.
Councillor Russell.
Yes.
Councillor Timmers.
Yes.
Mayor Easton.
Yes.
And that motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Do we have any other comments from council with regards to the report? So I'm going to share, pick up on a couple of comments that came up tonight, and I'm not really going to speak too much about the numbers. I think the numbers we can challenge the data. I think there is a need, and I would say that the need is growing in that as we see the value of the houses in our community going up and wages are not keeping pace with those numbers, I would see the need is going to grow. Where I'm going to go is to a couple of the comments that are made about keeping affordable housing affordable. And I'm just very uncomfortable with the recommendation of a change to our CIP, not having anything within that CIP that forces the owner of the property to have that property remain affordable. And I'm concerned about, and it's the same, in my opinion, the same loophole that we've got in the what we call for sale units, that we come out with a CIP for those items or those homes, townhomes, whatever they are, and that owner can turn around and sell that unit at market price, and we've invested in that unit for years. So I really think that we need to tighten that up even more, that we need to figure out a way that affordable housing, that we are putting rent restrictions in, or we're, somehow we are managing through the CIP, the life of the CIP at least, that affordable house or rental unit stays affordable. So tonight, with the way this motion is set up, I'm in for the numbers. I'm not in for moving forward on the CIP. I think there needs to be more discussion around that. So I see Kathleen Dale. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, to help you out, we did talk about that in the staff report, but it wasn't a specific recommendation. You could always add staff be directed to review mechanisms to ensure that the affordable housing remains as affordable housing over the long term.
So that, does that mean that we move ahead with the CIPs, or we're going to do that instead?
No, Mr. Chairman, it would be including all of the above. So as part of reviewing the CIPs, if somebody wants to get approval for a development charge grant for rental housing, in addition to that, they're going to have to enter into an agreement to ensure it remains affordable over the long term. So that would be part of the CIP review.
Written into the CIP.
Or the agreement, because anybody that gets a community improvement plan grant, they have to sign an agreement. And I know we can, through either regional housing and or our solicitors, we can come up with the appropriate, whether it's a standalone agreement or whether it's a supplemental information in an agreement, that can be implemented.
I would suggest that there's enough concern that I've heard tonight. Councillor Miklick, Councillor Rajima come to mind, their comments, that I would suggest we defer that piece of the motion tonight and do go to our legal team and have that put into the motion, the wording on that, so that at the end of the day, we want to keep our affordable housing out there on the market. And I guess the other piece of this is, you know, how do we qualify those that are going into that affordable housing? And how do we keep out folks? How do we keep out folks that are just taking advantage of the lower cost of housing, which I think is another challenge for us. So just, you know, those are my thoughts around it. I think the initiative is absolutely outstanding. Again, I don't get too hung up on the numbers. I think the numbers we could dispute and challenge, but I think the need is there and the need is growing. But I'm just more concerned about the way we are going about it. We have who was next in the queue, Madam Clerk?
Councillor Russell.
So we're now going to the third time. Is that
So-
Madam Clerk?
We've handled the that motion. This is now the report, but if Councillor Russell would like to make his way back down the list, we can do that. But now we're talking about the report that was to the other motion.
So he's been on twice to the report as well. The motion was the third thing that he brought up in the.
So the next one in line then, who hasn't spoken, is Councillor Reimer.
Councillor Reimer, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. I would echo your comments 100%. I've read through this report several times, so thank you very much to Matt and Kathleen and to Josh. There's a lot. Every time I read through this, there's more stuff that pops out. So for me, the concern is I realize some of that data is dated, but the need for me is definitely here. I just have a concern with getting our CIP to the people that need it, like an assurance that the renter is going to benefit from that long term. And I would support. I would like to see that part. I would agree with the deferral of that part of our recommendation as opposed to an amendment that Director Dale had talked about. I'd like to see some of that a little more, whether it's a connection with regional housing or another organization somewhere where we can see the part that affordable housing is going to reach that renter. When we have the CIP in place, that it follows a chain and that we can see, yep, here's where that person or that family is going to benefit from this long term. So I would support the deferral of that part of the motion as opposed to amendment. Thank you, Chairman McPherson.
Thank you, Councillor Reimer. Next, I have Councillor Pachariva.
Chair McPherson, I'm going to go in the opposite direction. Director Dale has given us a friendly amendment to the motion to be able to forge ahead. We've got to start somewhere. We can't keep deferring this. I make a motion that we take Director Dale's comments, we make them part of the motion here to the report, and we vote. So if Kathleen would recant that, you know what? She's the Director of Planning and has given us a great starting point to amend what's here coming out of the discussion tonight. Don't defer it anymore. Take that and let's go.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have that in writing, Ms. Dale? We do not have that yet.
What in writing?
Do we have the amendment to the piece on the CIP? We do not.
Mr. Chairman, I just provided a verbal example of what could be done. I could easily put it in words to our clerk.
That would be helpful.
So she could read it back. It might just take a minute.
That would be helpful.
While we're waiting for that, Chair McPherson, I know that there's others that want to speak before we go to that amendment.
We can do that.
Okay. So Councillor Patriva, you still have your hand up. Do you still have something to add to that?
No, but you know, it would be an apropos time to take a break, rewind the tape, write it down, because we're 3 hours in, and then we can come back and vote on it.
So we're gonna carry on and get this done. So do we have others that would speak to this? Do we have to speak to the motion or the amendment, or can we speak to the report, Madam Clerk?
So right now, what we would be doing is because we have an amendment on the floor that has been made. I know that Councillor Russell had his hand up, and we need to speak to the amendment made now.
Okay, let's
But
speak to
I don't have the wording to that amendment just yet. Hold on a second. This is happening as I speak. Just one moment, please. And so Kathleen, I'm going to assume that that is being added to the end of this recommendation.
Yes.
Okay, and so at the end of this recommendation that you have before you in the report, what it will say amended is that staff investigate mechanisms that can be put in place as part of the CIP grants to ensure that the affordable housing remains as affordable housing over the long term. That's the amendment that's being put forward right now. So now, Chair McPherson, we would take comments to that amendment.
Okay, that's good. We have who in the queue?
Okay, so now we have Councillor Regima to speak to that first.
Councillor Regima.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to thank you for bringing that point up, because I was operating under the assumption, and maybe I read it too quickly, but at the bottom of page 51, CIP agreements will be required to ensure that the affordable housing units remain as affordable housing units. So I read that thinking that we already had that in place, and this is, or under this report, that if we approve the recommendations of this report, that we'd be approving that. And to me, that's crucial. That's at the very heart of what we're trying to do. So I absolutely support the amendment. I'm a little concerned about the wording of the amendment, and then that's just that staff investigate, because I think that that criteria has to be put in place to give this teeth. It's at the very basis of what we're trying to do here. So I would propose to amend the wording that that policies be with a little more teeth, so that we know we're going to be adding policies and adding those criteria subject to consultation with legal counsel, but that we will be putting those in place, of course, subject to consultation with legal counsel. And I think we'll find that we are able to do that, or I hope that we find that we are able to do that.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor, next, Madam Clerk, Councillor Timmers.
That's correct.
Councillor Timmers, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. I am in support of the amendment as well. I thought that it had, spoken to this in the report, but I don't see any harm in putting it in an amendment so that it's very clear. So I'm supportive.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the amendment is a heck of a lot better than what was originally brought forward, and I think it does start pointing us in the right direction. I do still have concerns about the implications of what is being proposed without knowing the long-term impacts, not only on making sure that it does address Lincoln's population that is seeking affordable housing in particular, but also as part of the budget process, we did have a lot of questions and concerns raised about DC funding, overall tax revenue, and impacts on CIPs on wastewater and some of our water projects coming up. So I would prefer to have this referred possibly to another committee in Q1, where at that point our new Director of Finance, Administration, and Innovation will be in place, And at that point, we can probably get some maybe different information or some updated information on the overall impact of what's being proposed here.
So Madam Clerk, question to you. So if we put a deferral on the table, would that jump ahead of the amendment, or do we need to do the amendment first?
So to make it interesting, we have an amendment to the amendment. And so we vote on the amendment to the amendment first, work our way down to the amended main motion, and then we just vote. So we'll vote on Councillor Russell's amendment to the amendment first.
And Councillor Russell, can you repeat that amendment to the amendment?
Yep. It would be that a motion to refer report PD 36-20 and the recommendations of staff to the General Business and Finance Committee, so Council and our new Director of Finance Administration and Innovation can get a better understanding of the impacts of the CIPs contained therein, as well as the impacts on DC funding, tax revenue, and the cost of future infrastructure projects.
Okay, let's vote. Madam Clerk.
Yeah. So moved by Councillor Russell. Councillor Brunei,
No.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor McClick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
No.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
No.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
No.
Mayor Easton,
You're on mute, Mary Easton.
My apologies, no.
Thank you.
so that is a loss.
Okay. So now we move to the amendment, the original amendment, and we have the wording as it currently stands with a investigate in it. So Madam Clerk, would you call the vote?
So there was an amendment to that wording, and the wording, I believe that Councillor Rajima had flagged was investigate mechanisms. And so you had flagged that to say that staff investigate and or implement policies as part of the CIP grants to ensure that the affordable housing remains as affordable housing over the long term. Does that speak to what you wanted to say, Councillor Rajima?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I think not investigate, but that staff implement and of course consult with legal.
Okay.
So implement policies that ensure that, or implement criteria that ensures that the housing being incentivized through the CIP remain affordable, subject to consultation with legal.
Okay.
Because essentially, if we're incentivizing rental housing and we're not ensuring that they remain affordable, we're not doing what we're trying to do.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, and just Chair McPherson, I have a question raised by Councillor Pachariva.
Go ahead.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yeah, through you, Madam Clerk. So the motion, so after Councillor Russell's initial motion, I had made the motion to include Director Dale's clause to our original motion. So wondering where that stands. Did I miss that when I went to the bathroom? Because
I think you did. I think you did. We did incorporate Ms. Dale's amendment, and we just changed the wording in it. So that's where we're at now.
Do you have any further comments, Councillor?
why did we change the wording?
The wording it's been recommended to be changed so that it's more definitive of what action we are going to take. It's
Exactly.
impl-
That's what
im-
Director Dale said.
It's implement versus investigate. So it's now been changed to implement.
Okay, that's okay. I'm good with that then.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Mr. CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think we've landed there, not in an effort to communicate, to complicate it any further. I think we had said, because this is the typical way in which we word these things, to investigate, which includes the legal piece of it, and implement. And really, that was the only addition to Councillor Pachariva's motion. So I see it as a friendly amendment from Councillor Rajima to Councillor Pachariva's initial motion, and simply to add the words, not implement a mechanism, but to implement or to investigate and implement. The implement means the doing, the investigate means us talking to legal.
Very
So
good.
that's how I would see our direction.
Very good. I think that's the direction that we're looking for.
Okay, so I see two other hands raised before we go to the vote, Counselor.
Mayor
Chairman.
Easton?
Mr. Chairman, I find this very irregular not to have the motion up on the screen. And so I'm trying to sort out whether there's going to be, whether we're going back to the main motion after we deal with this motion. Could I just check that with the clerk?
Madam Clerk?
Yeah, so we've got an amendment to the motion, and so we're voting on that amendment.
Okay, we have an amendment to the main motion.
Correct.
Okay, and then there won't be another motion after that unless someone puts another one on the table.
So we've got an amendment to the main motion, and it is to add this particular clause to the main motion. And so we can vote on this as a whole, including the amendment. If that fails, we go back to the main motion as it was originally.
All right, so if I wanted to add, now I'm asking for your advice through you, Mr. Chair. If I wanted to add a piece that directs the CAO to come back or directs the committee, the task force to continue to meet and have the CAO come back with a work plan for 2021, would it go as part of this amendment, or would it be best positioned with the amendment to the main motion? I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, but I cannot deal with a situation where there are no motions up on the board. When they become complex like this, it's very, 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 very difficult.
Madam Clerk, would you read the entire motion for us?
Yeah, I'm just trying to bring it up on my screen. Just give me 1 minute.
That would be very helpful, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
If you'll just bear with me for a moment. Almost there, just 1 moment. Okay. Please let me know when you see it up on my screen, Chair McPherson.
Yes, we see it.
Okay, so this is the main motion here. Council receive report PD 3620 for information. Council adopt the high housing need target as follows. A, construct 140 units of affordable rental housing consisting of 126 bachelor and or 1-bedroom dwelling units, 7 2-bedroom dwelling units, and 7 3+ bedroom dwelling units. Council approve the changes to the funding eligibility for the development charge reduction grant in the Vineland Central Business District and the mixed use and residential intensification community improvement plans, wherein funding will only be provided to projects that are for rental housing, co-op or nonprofit housing that include affordable rental housing. Staff be directed to initiate the changes to the Beamsville Commercial Core and Ontario Street Corridor, the Vineland Central Business District, and the mixed use and residential intensification community improvement plans as outlined on pages 16 and 17 of this report to encourage the construction of affordable rental housing. The amended version to add to the main motion is that staff investigate and implement provisions that can be put in place as part of the CIP grants to ensure that affordable housing remains as affordable housing over the long term.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much for that accommodation, and that is very helpful. Anything else if anything further that I had to say can be strictly dealt with as staff direction. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilor Brunet.
You're on mute, Councillor.
Just move on. I'm okay. Just move on.
Okay, so we will, thank you, Councilor. We will go to the vote on the amendment.
Okay, Councillor Brunet,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Miklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Support.
and that carries.
So there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councilor Rajima. Do I need to go through the entire motion again, Madam Clerk?
Well, it carried as amended, so we're good.
Okay, we're all good? Very
You're
good.
good.
Fantastic. And we have now concluded the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. We will now rotate to allow Chair and also Deputy Mayor Mikulik to assume the chair at this time for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda.
Thank you very much, Chair McPherson. Great job navigating us through that discussion. Before we get started with the General Business and Finance Committee meeting, I request that we take a 6-minute break. That brings us to 9:15. Does that work for everyone?
All in favor? We're good.
All right. See you in